On July 16, 1945, a small group of soldiers, scientists, and military officers stood scattered across the empty plains of southern New Mexico. There was darkness, silence, and the nervous anticipation of people who understood that within minutes they might witness something no human being had ever seen before. Some wore heavy welding goggles. Others turned their backs to the horizon, unsure whether even looking at what was about to happen was safe. A few tried to hide their anxiety with quiet jokes. Others said almost nothing at all. The air was damp after a night of thunderstorms that had repeatedly delayed the schedule. Every extra hour of waiting only increased the tension. Years of work, billions of dollars, and the efforts of more than 100,000 people had all led to this single moment. Then the countdown reached zero. For an instant, the desert became brighter than the sun. A blinding flash swallowed the darkness, turning night into an eerie daylight visible for hundreds of miles. A giant fireball climbed into the sky, growing larger with every passing second. The heat reached observers standing miles away. Moments later came a deep, rolling shockwave that shook buildings, rattled windows, and echoed across the mountains. Some people instinctively ducked. Others simply stared, unable to speak. One witness later said it felt as though the earth itself had come alive. The explosion was unlike anything humanity had ever created. In less than a second, the world had entered a completely new era. The age of gunpowder, cannons, and conventional explosives had suddenly become the past. The atomic age had begun. Among those watching was the project's scientific director, Robert Oppenheimer. Years later, he recalled a line from the ancient Hindu scripture known as the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Whether those exact words entered his mind in that instant or only later has long been debated, but the quote came to symbolize the overwhelming realization shared by many who stood in that desert. They had proven that the impossible was possible. They had also unleashed a force whose consequences no one could fully predict. But this story did not begin in the New Mexico desert. It began thousands of miles away in university laboratories across Europe where curious physicists were trying to understand the smallest building blocks of matter. It began in cities where brilliant scientists watched democracy collapse around them and fled persecution with little more than notebooks, ideas, and hope. It began with discoveries that seemed to promise nothing more than a deeper understanding of nature, only to become the foundation of the most destructive weapon ever built. It also began with fear. By the late 1930s, Adolf Hitler's Germany had become one of the world's leading centers of scientific research. German physicists had helped unlock the mysteries of the atom, and many of the greatest minds in physics had once worked in German universities. To scientists who understood these discoveries, an unsettling question emerged. If splitting the atom released an unimaginable amount of energy, what would happen if Nazi Germany turned that discovery into a weapon? That question transformed theoretical science into a race against time. In Washington, President Franklin Roosevelt was initially cautious. America was still struggling to emerge from the Great Depression, and another European war seemed distant. Few politicians could imagine that an abstract field like nuclear physics would determine the outcome of the largest conflict in history. Yet a handful of refugee scientists believed exactly that. They feared that hesitation might hand Adolf Hitler the ultimate advantage. Those fears would soon trigger one of the most extraordinary mobilizations America had ever attempted. Entire cities would appear almost overnight where empty forests, farmland, and deserts had once stood. Thousands of ordinary Americans would wake each morning, go to work behind barbed wire, and never be told what they were building. Nobel Prize-winning scientists would live in isolated communities under military guard, surrounded by secrecy so strict that many families did not know where their loved ones had disappeared. Engineers would invent entirely new industries. Factory workers would operate machines whose true purpose was hidden from them. Military officers would oversee a project so secret that even the Vice President of the United States knew almost nothing about it. The effort would cost nearly $2 billion in wartime money, an almost unimaginable sum at the time, and employ more people than many American cities contained. Yet for years, most Americans had no idea it even existed. The code name sounded almost ordinary, the Manhattan Project. In reality, it was far more than a weapons program. It was a collision of science, politics, industry, geography, economics, espionage, and war on a scale the world had never seen. It was a story of brilliant minds driven by curiosity, refugees driven by survival, generals driven by urgency, and leaders forced to make decisions whose consequences would echo for generations. It is also a story filled with paradoxes. The project helped end one of history's deadliest wars, yet it also began a nuclear arms race that brought humanity to the edge of self-destruction. It produced technologies that transformed medicine, energy, and scientific research, while simultaneously creating weapons capable of destroying entire cities in seconds. Many of the people who built the bomb later spent the rest of their lives trying to prevent it from ever being used again. So how did all of this happen? Why did the United States succeed where every other nation failed? Why were remote deserts, river valleys, and isolated mountains chosen to host one of history's greatest secrets? Who were the ordinary workers whose names rarely appear in history books? And how did a scientific breakthrough become the defining moment of the 20th century? To answer those questions, we have to return to a world standing on the brink of catastrophe. A world where the greatest weapon ever imagined existed only as a frightening possibility, and where a handful of scientists believed that understanding the atom might determine the fate of civilization itself. Chapter 1. A world racing toward catastrophe. In the summer of 1939, Europe looked peaceful, at least from a distance. Tourists still wandered through Paris. Cafes in Vienna still served coffee. University lecture halls continued to fill with students eager to study physics, chemistry, and mathematics. Newspapers discussed politics, sports, and the economy. To many ordinary people, life carried on as it always had. But beneath that ordinary surface, something far more dangerous was unfolding. Across Europe, armies were growing larger. Factories that once produced consumer goods were quietly shifting toward military production. Borders were becoming tense. Diplomats spoke politely in public while privately preparing for the possibility that another great war was becoming unavoidable. Only 21 years had passed since the guns of the First World War had fallen silent. For millions of Europeans, those memories were still painfully fresh. Entire generations had been lost in muddy trenches stretching from the North Sea to Switzerland. Cities had been shattered. Empires that had ruled for centuries had collapsed almost overnight. Nearly every family had buried someone. No one wanted another war. And yet history was beginning to move in exactly that direction. In Germany, one man promised that the humiliation of defeat would never happen again. Adolf Hitler had risen from political obscurity by offering simple answers to complicated problems. Germany, he claimed, had not truly lost the First World War because its soldiers were weak. Instead, it had been betrayed from within. The Treaty of Versailles had stripped Germany of territory, military power, and national pride. Millions of Germans believed they had been unfairly punished. Hitler transformed that resentment into political power. Once appointed chancellor in 1933, he moved with astonishing speed. Political opponents disappeared, independent newspapers were silenced, labor unions were dissolved, courts lost their independence. power became concentrated in one man. At the same time, Germany began rebuilding its military in open defiance of international agreements. New tanks rolled off assembly lines, aircraft factories expanded rapidly. Young men were drafted into an army that officially should not have existed under the post-war settlement. Most of the world watched nervously. Some governments protested. Others hoped concessions would preserve peace. Few understood how quickly events were accelerating. But among Europe's scientific community, another transformation was taking place, one that would prove just as important as Germany's military expansion. For decades, Germany had been the undisputed center of modern physics. If you wanted to study the deepest mysteries of nature during the early 20th century, you went to Berlin, Göttingen, Leipzig, or Munich. These universities attracted brilliant minds from across the world. Laboratories buzzed with discoveries about electricity, radiation, quantum mechanics, and the strange behavior of atoms. The atom itself had become one of science's greatest puzzles. For centuries, philosophers believed atoms were the smallest possible pieces of matter. But by the early 1900s, researchers had discovered that atoms were anything but simple. They contained tiny particles, electrons, protons, and eventually neutrons that behaved in ways no one had imagined. Every new experiment seemed to raise even bigger questions. Could matter itself contain enormous amounts of hidden energy? Albert Einstein had proposed exactly that in 1905 with one of history's most famous equations, E = mc. The equation looked deceptively simple. It suggested that mass and energy were actually different forms of the same thing. Even a tiny amount of matter, if converted completely into energy, could release an almost unimaginable amount of power. For years, however, this remained little more than a fascinating mathematical idea. Scientists had no practical way to unlock that energy. It was like knowing a mountain contained diamonds while having no tools capable of reaching them. Most physicists were driven not by dreams of weapons, but by curiosity. They wanted to understand how nature worked. They debated theories in classrooms, argued over calculations late into the night, and celebrated discoveries that seemed to have little connection to everyday life. Then, politics invaded science. Almost immediately after taking power, Hitler's government began targeting Jewish professors, researchers, and intellectuals. Universities that had once symbolized free inquiry became instruments of ideology. Outstanding scientists suddenly found themselves dismissed, threatened, or banned from teaching, not because of their work, but because of who they were. The consequences were extraordinary. One after another, some of the greatest scientific minds in Europe packed their belongings and left. Many escaped with little warning. Some abandoned laboratories they had spent decades building. Others left behind family members they would never see again. The world was witnessing one of the greatest migrations of scientific talent in history. Among those forced to leave were men whose names would later become inseparable from the Manhattan Project. Leo Szilard had one of the most imaginative scientific minds of his generation. Born in Budapest, he possessed an unusual habit of mentally exploring ideas long before anyone else considered them possible. Friends often described him as someone whose thoughts seemed years ahead of everyone around him. Edward Teller, another Hungarian physicist, also fled the growing danger. So did Eugene Wigner. Enrico Fermi, although not Jewish himself, left Italy after Mussolini's racial laws threatened his Jewish wife. Niels Bohr would eventually flee occupied Denmark under dramatic circumstances. Many others scattered across Britain, Canada, and especially the United States. America did not yet realize what it had gained. It wasn't simply welcoming refugees, it was quietly becoming the new center of global scientific research. Universities like Princeton, Columbia, the University of Chicago, and Berkeley suddenly found themselves filled with some of Europe's brightest minds. Their accents differed, their backgrounds differed, but many shared the same fear. They knew exactly what Hitler represented, and they knew what German science was capable of achieving. Ironically, Nazi Germany had driven away many of the very scientists who had made German physics world famous. Political ideology had weakened one of Germany's greatest intellectual advantages. America, almost by accident, inherited it. Yet no one imagined that within a few years these refugee scientists would help create a weapon unlike anything in history. At first, the focus remained entirely scientific. Researchers across Europe continued studying atomic nuclei, bombarding them with neutrons and carefully recording the results. Then came one of the greatest surprises 20th century science had ever produced. Late in 1938, German chemists Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann conducted experiments involving uranium, one of the heaviest naturally occurring elements. The results made no sense. Instead of producing slightly heavier elements, uranium appeared to break apart into much smaller ones. It was completely unexpected. Lise Meitner, an Austrian physicist who had fled Nazi Germany because she was Jewish, received word of Hahn's findings while living in exile. Together with her nephew Otto Frisch, she worked through the puzzling data. During a winter walk through the snowy Swedish countryside, they reached a stunning conclusion. The uranium atom had split. Frisch borrowed a biological term to describe what had happened. He called it fission. The name sounded harmless. Its implications were anything but. When the nucleus split, it released additional neutrons. Those neutrons could strike other uranium atoms. Those atoms would split as well. Each new split released more neutrons. The process could continue growing. It was like knocking over the first domino in an endless chain. Linus Szilard immediately recognized something that many others overlooked. Years earlier, while waiting at a London traffic light, he had imagined the theoretical possibility of a self-sustaining chain reaction. At the time, it had been little more than an intellectual exercise. Now, suddenly, nature had provided the missing piece. His frightening prediction might actually be possible. If enough suitable uranium could be assembled together, the chain reaction might grow uncontrollably. The energy released would dwarf any conventional explosive. This wasn't merely a bigger bomb, it represented an entirely different category of destruction. The scientific community reacted with a mixture of excitement and dread. Excitement because one of nature's deepest mysteries had finally been solved. Dread because they immediately recognized its military implications. Many physicists began asking the same question. If they understood this, would German scientists understand it too? The answer was obvious. Of course they would. After all, the crucial discovery had occurred inside Germany. For refugee scientists who had escaped Hitler, the realization was terrifying. They personally knew many of Germany's leading physicists. They had attended conferences together, shared laboratories, published research side by side. If they could imagine an atomic bomb, so could their former colleagues. And those colleagues were now working inside Nazi Germany. The timing could hardly have been worse. In March 1938, Germany annexed Austria. Later that same year came the Munich Agreement, allowing Hitler to seize part of Czechoslovakia. Many European leaders celebrated what they believed was peace. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain famously returned from Munich declaring he had achieved peace for our time. But Hitler interpreted compromise differently. Each diplomatic victory convinced him that his opponents lacked the will to stop him. His ambitions only grew. By early 1939, German forces occupied the remainder of Czechoslovakia. The illusion that Hitler merely sought limited territorial adjustments disappeared. War was beginning to feel inevitable. Meanwhile, scientists on both sides of the Atlantic found themselves facing a profound moral dilemma. For generations, scientific discoveries had belonged to humanity. Researchers published their findings openly. Ideas crossed borders freely. International conferences celebrated cooperation rather than competition. Now those traditions suddenly seemed dangerous. Should discoveries about nuclear fission be published, or should they be kept secret? Some scientists argued that knowledge should never be hidden. Others feared openness might help Hitler build the world's first atomic weapon. It was an unprecedented debate. The very culture of modern science was changing. Some researchers voluntarily stopped publishing sensitive work. Others quietly informed government officials. The line between civilian research and military planning became increasingly blurred. America, however, remained strangely detached. Although President Franklin Roosevelt closely monitored events in Europe, the United States was still deeply influenced by isolationism. Many Americans believed the horrors of the First World War had proven that European conflicts should remain Europe's problem. Congress had passed neutrality acts designed to keep America out of another overseas war. Most voters wanted prosperity, not foreign entanglements. The Great Depression still cast a long shadow over the nation. Jobs, housing, and economic recovery dominated political discussion. Few people had ever heard of nuclear fission. Even fewer imagined it might soon become one of the government's highest priorities. Military planners focused on ships, aircraft, tanks, and artillery. Atomic physics seemed impossibly abstract. It certainly didn't sound like something capable of determining the outcome of a global war. But among the refugee scientists, urgency continued growing. Leo Szilard became increasingly restless. Every newspaper headline about Hitler's expansion made him more convinced that time was running out. He worried that American officials simply didn't understand the danger. He tried explaining it to colleagues. Some agreed. Others believed practical atomic weapons remained decades away. No one knew who was right. There were still enormous technical obstacles. Scientists didn't yet know whether a bomb was actually feasible. Even if it was, producing enough usable material appeared almost impossible. The engineering challenges were staggering. Entirely new technologies would have to be invented. Factories unlike any ever built would be required. The costs would be enormous. Many governments might simply conclude it wasn't worth trying. But Szilard couldn't dismiss the possibility. He had escaped one dictatorship. He had watched Europe slide toward catastrophe. He believed that history often rewarded those who acted first. If Nazi Germany succeeded before the democracies even began, the consequences might be irreversible. Then, on September 1, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. Within days, Britain and France declared war. The Second World War had begun. Cities that had seemed peaceful only weeks earlier prepared for bombing raids. Millions of young men were mobilized. Factories shifted into wartime production. The largest conflict in human history was underway. Across the Atlantic, the United States was still officially neutral. But neutrality no longer felt permanent. For Leo Szilard and several of his fellow scientists, one conclusion had become impossible to ignore. Waiting was no longer an option. If America's leaders failed to grasp what nuclear fission might mean, someone had to make them understand. There was only one problem. The warning needed to come from a voice powerful enough that even the President of the United States would stop and listen. Only one scientist possessed that kind of influence. His name was Albert Einstein. And before long, a single letter bearing his signature would begin changing the course of history forever. Chapter 2. The Letter That Reached the White House. As Europe slipped into war, the most important battle in the world had not yet been fought. There were no tanks rolling across borders, no bombers darkening the skies, no armies marching toward one another. Instead, the struggle was taking place inside the minds of a handful of scientists who had become convinced that the future of civilization might depend on whether one government acted before another. Their greatest fear was surprisingly simple: not that an atomic bomb already existed, but that someone else might build it first. For Leo Szilard, that possibility became almost impossible to ignore. Unlike many scientists who preferred to stay inside laboratories, Szilard constantly thought about the larger consequences of scientific discovery. Friends often joked that he seemed to live several years in the future. While others focused on solving today's problems, Szilard was already imagining tomorrow's. That habit now became a burden. Every newspaper reporting another German victory added to his anxiety. Every scientific paper on uranium made him wonder whether researchers inside Germany were making the same calculations. Every week that passed without American action felt like another week handed to Adolf Hitler. There was one problem: Leo Szilard was virtually unknown outside scientific circles. If he wrote to the President of the United States, the letter might never reach Roosevelt's desk. Even if it did, there was no guarantee that anyone in Washington would understand its significance. He needed someone whose name alone commanded attention. There was only one obvious choice: Albert Einstein. By 1939, Einstein was already one of the most famous people on Earth. His wild white hair had become instantly recognizable, but it was his mind that fascinated the world. His theories had transformed physics, challenging long-held ideas about space, time, gravity, and energy. Newspapers called him a genius. Politicians admired him. Ordinary people who could not explain a single one of his equations still knew his name. Ironically, Einstein had played no direct role in discovering nuclear fission. But more than 3 decades earlier, he had written the equation that quietly underpinned everything now unfolding: E equals mc squared. The equation had shown that matter itself contained extraordinary amounts of energy. At the time, Einstein had viewed it as a profound insight into nature, not as the blueprint for a weapon. Like most physicists, he had assumed that unlocking such energy would remain beyond humanity's technological abilities. History had moved faster than anyone expected. Einstein had also become one of Adolf Hitler's most visible enemies. As a Jewish intellectual and outspoken critic of Nazism, he had left Germany after Hitler seized power in 1933. Returning would have been impossible. His books had been burned, his property confiscated. Nazi propaganda portrayed him as the embodiment of everything the regime despised. America became his new home. He accepted a position at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey, where he continued pursuing theoretical physics. Although he enjoyed international fame, he preferred a remarkably quiet life. He sailed small boats, played the violin, and often walked through town wearing clothes that looked as though he had chosen comfort over appearance. It was to this quiet refuge that Leo Szilard traveled during the summer of 1939. Einstein was spending time in a modest cottage on Long Island, away from Princeton's academic life. Szilard, accompanied by fellow physicist Eugene Wigner, drove there carrying an idea that might change history. The conversation that followed has become one of the most consequential meetings of the 20th century. Szilard explained the latest developments in uranium research. He described the discovery of nuclear fission. He explained the possibility of a self-sustaining chain reaction. Then he reached the conclusion that truly mattered: Germany might be trying to build an atomic bomb. Einstein listened carefully. He immediately grasped the implications. Although he had not been deeply involved in recent nuclear research, he understood enough physics to recognize that Szilard's fears were entirely plausible. The conversation disturbed him. Einstein had long been known as a committed pacifist. He believed war represented one of humanity's greatest failures. Throughout the 1920s and early 1930s, he had frequently spoken against militarism. Yet Hitler had forced him to reconsider. Nazism presented a problem unlike previous conflicts. Einstein increasingly believed that refusing to confront aggressive dictators could produce even greater disasters than war itself. For perhaps the first time in his life, he found himself supporting military preparations, not because he wanted war, but because he feared what might happen if democratic nations failed to prepare. Szilard proposed writing directly to President Franklin Roosevelt. Einstein agreed. Together, they began drafting what appeared to be an ordinary letter. Its words would alter the course of history. The letter warned that recent scientific discoveries suggested uranium could become the basis for extraordinarily powerful bombs. It explained that such weapons might destroy entire ports with a single explosion. It also noted disturbing reports that Germany had restricted uranium exports from occupied Czechoslovakia, a possible sign that German authorities already recognized uranium's military importance. The message did not claim Germany possessed an atomic bomb. It warned that Germany might be trying to build one. That distinction mattered enormously. No one actually knew what German scientists were accomplishing. Fear filled the gaps left by uncertainty. The letter urged Roosevelt to support American uranium research before it was too late. Einstein signed it on August 2, 1939. Curiously, the timing almost prevented history from unfolding as we know it. Delivering a letter to the president was not as simple as dropping it into the mail. Instead, economist Alexander Sachs, a trusted friend and informal advisor to Roosevelt, agreed to hand-deliver the document personally. Then, events intervened. Sachs delayed his meeting. Days passed, then weeks. Meanwhile, Europe exploded into war. On September 1st, Germany invaded Poland. Britain and France declared war 2 days later. Newspaper headlines filled with reports of armored divisions, aerial bombardments, and collapsing front lines. Roosevelt suddenly found himself consumed by an international crisis. The Einstein letter remained undelivered. For Leo Szilard, the delay was agonizing. Every passing day strengthened his fear that America was wasting precious time. If German physicists had already begun serious work, weeks could matter. Months certainly would. Finally, on October 11, 1939, Alexander Sachs entered the White House carrying the letter. Roosevelt greeted him warmly. The president had known Sachs for years and respected his judgment. Instead of immediately presenting the document, Sachs chose a different approach. He began telling Roosevelt a story. He described how seemingly unimportant inventions had repeatedly transformed warfare throughout history. He reminded the president that governments often ignored revolutionary technologies until they were forced to confront them on the battlefield. Only then did Sachs present Einstein's letter. Roosevelt listened carefully. The document itself was surprisingly brief, yet its implications were enormous. Imagine hearing, perhaps for the first time, that a single bomb might someday destroy an entire city. It sounded almost unbelievable. The science was complicated. The engineering seemed nearly impossible. There was no proof such a weapon could actually be built. Even Einstein and Szilard admitted there were enormous uncertainties. Still, Roosevelt understood one essential point. If there was even a small chance that Hitler might obtain such a weapon first, ignoring the warning would be irresponsible. After a long pause, Roosevelt reportedly turned to one of his military aides and said words that changed American history. "This requires action." It was a remarkably understated response. There were no dramatic speeches, no emergency declarations, no immediate billion-dollar program. Instead, Roosevelt authorized the creation of the Advisory Committee on Uranium. Its purpose was simple: investigate whether the scientists' concerns had merit. The committee's initial budget reflected how cautiously Washington viewed the matter. Only $6,000 was allocated for early experiments. Even adjusted for inflation, it was tiny compared with what would come later. The contrast is astonishing. Within a few years, America would spend nearly $2 billion on the Manhattan Project. Yet the first federal investment in atomic research could barely purchase a modern luxury automobile. The government simply wasn't convinced. Most military leaders remained skeptical. The United States Army focused on expanding conventional forces. The Navy worried about ships and submarines. The Air Corps concentrated on aircraft production. Atomic physics seemed abstract compared with the immediate demands of preparing for possible war. Many officials believed practical atomic weapons remained decades away, if they were possible at all. In fairness, their skepticism wasn't unreasonable. The scientific challenges were immense. Researchers still didn't know which type of uranium could sustain a chain reaction. No one knew how to separate the necessary isotope efficiently. No one had designed a workable bomb. Even producing tiny quantities of enriched uranium appeared fantastically difficult. Building an atomic bomb wasn't like constructing a larger artillery shell. It required inventing entirely new industries. The scientists understood this. So did Roosevelt. That is why the advisory committee proceeded cautiously. Early meetings involved modest laboratory experiments, reports, and discussions rather than massive construction projects. Progress was slow, sometimes painfully slow. Scientists frequently complained that Washington didn't appreciate the urgency. Government officials complained that scientists kept asking for money without proving success was possible. Each side viewed the other with growing frustration. Meanwhile, the war in Europe intensified. Germany conquered Denmark and Norway. Then came the stunning offensive through Belgium and the Netherlands. France, widely considered one of Europe's strongest military powers, collapsed in just weeks. The speed of Hitler's victories shocked the world. Suddenly, the unimaginable seemed possible. If France could fall so quickly, what else had people underestimated? The answer increasingly seemed to be everything. Across the Atlantic, American attitudes slowly began changing. Although the nation remained officially neutral, Roosevelt expanded military production. Factories increased aircraft output. Shipyards accelerated construction. Defense spending climbed dramatically. The president still faced strong isolationist sentiment at home, but events overseas were making neutrality increasingly difficult to sustain. At the same time, British scientists reached an important conclusion. A secret research group known as the Maud Committee carefully analyzed whether an atomic bomb was technically feasible. After months of study, its findings were astonishing. Contrary to earlier assumptions, the committee concluded that a bomb was not only possible, it might be achievable much sooner than anyone expected. Moreover, it might require far less uranium than previously believed. This report transformed the conversation. The question was no longer whether an atomic bomb violated the laws of physics. It was whether a nation possessed enough resources, industrial capacity, and determination to build one before its enemies. Britain, fighting for survival under constant German bombing, lacked the industrial capacity to undertake such a colossal effort alone. America did not. The United States possessed something unique: vast distances, enormous electrical generation, abundant natural resources, powerful universities, an unmatched manufacturing base, and perhaps most importantly, geography that placed its industrial heartland safely beyond the reach of German bombers. These advantages would soon become decisive. Yet one event would finally eliminate any remaining hesitation. On the morning of December 7, 1941, Japanese aircraft attacked Pearl Harbor. In just a few hours, the United States was transformed. Neutrality ended. America entered the Second World War. Almost overnight, priorities shifted. Projects that had once moved through layers of bureaucracy suddenly received urgent attention. Budgets expanded. Military authority increased. Scientific research accelerated. President Roosevelt no longer had to persuade Americans that extraordinary measures were necessary. The nation was now fighting a global war. Every possible advantage mattered, including one that still existed only on paper. The modest uranium committee created because of Einstein's letter suddenly seemed far more important than anyone had imagined 2 years earlier. Within months, scattered scientific experiments would evolve into something unprecedented. The United States would decide not merely to study atomic energy, but to master it before any other nation on Earth. To accomplish that goal, Washington would need far more than brilliant scientists. It would need a leader capable of organizing the largest secret engineering project in history. The man chosen was not a famous physicist. He was a hard-driving Army engineer with a reputation for impossible deadlines, relentless efficiency, and little patience for excuses. His name was Leslie Groves, and together with an unlikely theoretical physicist named J. Robert Oppenheimer, he would transform a scientific dream into the Manhattan Project. Chapter 3: Building the Largest Secret Project in American History. By the summer of 1942, the question had changed. Just a few years earlier, America's leaders had wondered whether an atomic bomb was even possible. Scientists debated theories, government committees argued over funding, military officers questioned whether the entire idea belonged more in science fiction than in warfare. Now, those debates were over. The reports arriving in Washington painted a clear picture. British scientists believed the bomb could be built. American experiments suggested they were right. German nuclear research remained shrouded in secrecy, making it impossible to know how far Hitler's scientists had progressed. No one could afford to assume Germany was behind. The possibility that it might be ahead was enough. President Franklin Roosevelt understood that the United States faced a race unlike any in history. Winning would not depend on battlefield tactics or naval strength. It would depend on physics, engineering, manufacturing, and time. But there was another problem. The project was becoming far too large for scientists to manage alone. Universities were excellent at discovering new ideas. They were not designed to oversee construction projects involving tens of thousands of workers, billions of dollars, military security, and factories larger than entire towns. The government needed someone who could turn scientific theory into industrial reality. The Army found its man. His name was Leslie Richard Groves. At first glance, Groves did not seem like the ideal choice to work alongside the world's greatest scientists. He wasn't known for diplomacy. He wasn't particularly interested in academic debates. He had no background in nuclear physics. What he did possess was something equally valuable. He got things done. Groves had spent his career in the Army Corps of Engineers, an organization responsible for designing and building everything from military bases to massive infrastructure projects. During the early years of the war, he had supervised one of the most ambitious construction efforts in American history, the Pentagon. Even today, the Pentagon remains one of the largest office buildings on Earth. Building it during wartime required extraordinary coordination, relentless scheduling, and an ability to solve problems before they became disasters. Groves earned a reputation for exactly that. He demanded results. He expected long hours. He tolerated neither delays nor excuses. Many people found him intimidating. Some found him impossible to like. Yet almost everyone agreed on one thing. If the Army assigned Leslie Groves to a project, it usually got finished. In September 1942, Groves received orders that would define the rest of his life. He was to take command of America's atomic bomb program. The assignment surprised him. Like many military officers, he knew very little about nuclear physics. He later admitted that when he first became involved. He had only a vague understanding of what uranium enrichment actually meant. But Groves quickly realized something else. His job was not to become a physicist. His job was to remove every obstacle preventing physicists from succeeding. That distinction would prove critical. Within hours of taking command, Groves began making decisions at astonishing speed. He secured the highest possible priority for supplies. Steel shortages would not stop him. Copper shortages would not stop him. Construction materials would be delivered before most other military projects. He obtained virtually unlimited authority to acquire land, hire workers, negotiate contracts, and bypass bureaucratic delays. America was placing enormous trust in one Army engineer. Groves wasted no time. One of his earliest decisions involved selecting the project's scientific leader. On paper, the obvious candidates seemed plentiful. America had Nobel Prize winners, internationally renowned physicists, scientists with decades of experience directing laboratories. Yet Groves chose someone very few people expected. Robert Oppenheimer. The decision puzzled almost everyone. Oppenheimer had never managed a project of this size. He had never won a Nobel Prize. He had relatively little administrative experience. Even more concerning, government investigators had discovered that he had once associated with people connected to left-wing political organizations during the 1930s. Several friends had belonged to the Communist Party. His brother had been a member. His wife had previous political associations. During an era when security concerns were rapidly increasing, these connections raised serious questions. Many officials believed selecting Oppenheimer represented an unacceptable risk. Groves disagreed. He saw qualities others overlooked. Oppenheimer possessed one of the sharpest minds anyone had encountered. His knowledge extended far beyond theoretical physics. He understood chemistry, metallurgy, explosives, engineering, and mathematics well enough to communicate effectively with specialists in each field. More importantly, he had an extraordinary ability to bring brilliant people together. Scientific geniuses often possessed enormous egos. Many preferred working alone. Many disagreed passionately with one another. Oppenheimer somehow persuaded them to collaborate. He inspired rather than commanded. Scientists who normally resisted authority found themselves working tirelessly under his leadership. Groves trusted his instincts. Despite security concerns, he approved Oppenheimer's appointment. It became one of the most important personnel decisions of the entire war. The partnership between Groves and Oppenheimer could hardly have been more unusual. Groves was practical, direct, and often blunt. Oppenheimer was thoughtful, philosophical, and intellectually restless. Groves focused on schedules. Oppenheimer focused on ideas. Groves cared about logistics. Oppenheimer cared about solving impossible scientific problems. Their personalities frequently clashed. Yet, together, they formed an unexpectedly effective team. Each compensated for the other's weaknesses. One built organizations, the other built scientific consensus. Neither could have completed the project alone. But before scientists could design a bomb, America first needed places where the work could happen. Not ordinary laboratories, entire cities, secret cities. The scale of what followed remains difficult to comprehend. Most people imagine the Manhattan Project as a laboratory hidden somewhere in the desert. The reality was vastly larger. Building an atomic bomb required solving several completely different problems simultaneously. Scientists needed to enrich uranium. They needed to manufacture plutonium. They needed to design bomb mechanisms. They needed to test new materials. They needed to develop industrial processes that had never existed before. No single location could accomplish everything. Instead, the project spread across the United States. Its geography became one of its greatest strengths. Groves wanted sites that shared several characteristics. They needed enormous amounts of land. They needed abundant electricity. They needed reliable water supplies. They needed railroad connections. Most importantly, they needed isolation. If an accident occurred or if enemy spies somehow discovered the facilities, the consequences would be limited. Remote locations also made secrecy easier. The first major site emerged in eastern Tennessee. Nestled among rolling hills and river valleys lay a quiet farming community called Oak Ridge. Before the war, few Americans had heard of it. Families had lived there for generations, raising crops and attending small churches scattered across the countryside. Then government officials arrived. Residents received notices informing them that their land was being acquired for the war effort. Many had only weeks to leave. Some were compensated fairly. Others believed they never received enough. Entire communities disappeared. Churches were abandoned. Schools closed. Family cemeteries remained behind barbed wire. The transformation happened almost overnight. Bulldozers replaced tractors. Construction crews worked around the clock. Roads appeared where forests had stood. Rail lines expanded. Dormitories rose by the hundreds. Within months, one of America's largest construction sites covered thousands of acres. Few workers knew its purpose. Most simply understood they were helping win the war. Oak Ridge became the center of uranium enrichment. The process sounded deceptively simple. Natural uranium contains different forms called isotopes. Only one, uranium-235, could sustain the type of chain reaction necessary for an atomic bomb. Unfortunately, uranium-235 represented less than 1% of natural uranium. Separating it from the much more common uranium-238 became one of the greatest engineering challenges ever attempted. The two isotopes behaved almost identically chemically. Traditional methods failed. Scientists had to invent entirely new techniques. Eventually, they pursued several methods simultaneously because no one knew which would work first. It was an enormously expensive gamble. Gigantic buildings filled with miles of pipes, valves, and machinery began appearing across Oak Ridge. Some facilities became so large that workers rode bicycles inside them. Electricity consumption reached astonishing levels. At times, Oak Ridge used more power than entire states. Yet even the people operating these facilities often had no idea what they were producing. Workers received highly specialized tasks. One person monitored pressure gauges, another adjusted valves. Someone else recorded measurements. Each individual understood only a tiny piece of the overall operation. The less people knew, military planners believed, the safer the secret remained. Far to the northwest, another extraordinary city was taking shape. Along the Columbia River in southeastern Washington stood an isolated landscape of sagebrush, dry hills, and open desert. The location seemed almost empty. That was precisely why Groves wanted it. The Columbia River provided enormous quantities of water needed to cool nuclear reactors. Nearby hydroelectric dams supplied vast amounts of electricity. Thousands of acres separated the site from major population centers. This became Hanford. Unlike Oak Ridge, Hanford focused on producing plutonium. Plutonium did not exist naturally in significant quantities. Scientists had to manufacture it inside specially designed nuclear reactors, the first large-scale reactors ever built. The engineering challenges were unprecedented. No one had ever operated industrial nuclear reactors before. Everything had to be invented. Every safety procedure, every control system, every production method. Workers handled materials whose dangers were not yet fully understood. Radiation remained mysterious. Protective measures evolved constantly as scientists learned through experience. Hanford became one of history's greatest industrial experiments. Meanwhile, the scientific heart of the project required a completely different environment. Groves wanted a place isolated enough to preserve secrecy, yet attractive enough to persuade the world's finest scientists to relocate with their families. The search ended high on a remote mesa in northern New Mexico. Before the war, the site housed an exclusive boys' ranch school. Students rode horses, studied outdoors, and enjoyed spectacular views of mountains stretching across the high desert. Oppenheimer knew the area well. As a young man, he had fallen in love with New Mexico while recovering from illness. He spent countless summers hiking its mountains and exploring its deserts. When asked to recommend a location, he immediately suggested the mesa. Groves visited. Within minutes, he agreed. The ranch school closed. Construction began. Los Alamos was born. Unlike Oak Ridge or Hanford, Los Alamos would not resemble a factory. It would become a community of scientists unlike any the world had ever seen. Physicists, chemists, mathematicians, engineers, explosives experts, and metallurgists arrived from universities across America and Europe. Many brought wives. Some brought children. Some left prestigious academic careers behind, uncertain whether they would ever return. The town itself barely existed. Roads were primitive. Housing was limited. The altitude exceeded 7,000 feet. Dust blew constantly across the mesa. Winter snow alternated with blazing summer heat. Yet within this isolated landscape, extraordinary minds gathered together. Richard Feynman, Hans Bethe, Edward Teller, Enrico Fermi, John von Neumann, Norris Bradbury, dozens of future Nobel Prize winners. Many later joked that nowhere else on Earth had so much intelligence been concentrated into such a small place. Daily life often felt strangely ordinary despite the extraordinary mission. Children attended school, families organized dances, scientists played baseball. Neighbors hosted dinner parties. Meanwhile, inside laboratories only a short walk away, calculations were underway that could determine the future of civilization. Security surrounded everything. The town officially didn't exist. Mail was addressed only to a post office box in Santa Fe. Residents rarely told relatives where they lived. Visitors required authorization. Guards monitored entrances. Telephone conversations could be interrupted without warning. Even casual discussions remained restricted. Scientists who worked in neighboring buildings sometimes lacked permission to learn what each other was doing. Groves believed secrecy saved lives. The fewer people who understood the complete picture, the lower the risk of espionage. This compartmentalization extended far beyond Los Alamos. Across the Manhattan Project, more than 125,000 people eventually found themselves contributing to the effort. Most never knew they were building an atomic bomb. A machinist might spend months manufacturing identical metal components without understanding their purpose. An electrician might maintain equipment that enriched uranium while believing it produced something entirely different. A secretary might type reports filled with code words instead of meaningful descriptions. One famous example involved young women operating large machines at Oak Ridge. Their instructions were simple. Watch the dials. Adjust the controls exactly as trained. Never ask what the machines actually did. Many assumed the equipment measured electrical currents. Years later, they learned they had helped separate uranium isotopes essential for the first atomic bomb. The secrecy was so effective that even Vice President Harry Truman knew virtually nothing about the Manhattan Project. When Franklin Roosevelt died in April 1945, Truman suddenly became President of the United States. Only then was he finally informed that America had been spending billions of dollars developing a weapon unlike anything in history. Imagine becoming commander-in-chief during a global war, only to discover a massive secret program that had remained hidden from you. That was the extraordinary level of compartmentalization Groves had achieved. Of course, secrecy alone could not build an atomic bomb. Money mattered. And in this respect, the Manhattan Project became one of the boldest economic undertakings in American history. By the end of the war, the project had cost nearly $2 billion, equivalent to tens of billions today. Factories were constructed before engineers knew whether their processes would work. Entire production plants operated simultaneously using competing technologies because no one could predict which method would succeed. Normally, businesses avoid such expensive duplication. The Manhattan Project embraced it. Time mattered more than efficiency. If 3 different methods had a chance of working, America funded all 3. Failure was acceptable. Delay was not. It was a remarkable demonstration of America's industrial capacity. The nation's geography, vast natural resources, powerful manufacturing base, and ability to mobilize workers on an unprecedented scale made the project possible. Few countries on Earth possessed enough electricity to operate facilities like Oak Ridge. Few had enough open land for Hanford. Few could recruit thousands of scientists while simultaneously employing more than 100,000 construction workers, engineers, machinists, electricians, and technicians. The Manhattan Project was not merely a triumph of physics. It was a triumph of organization. But despite all the factories, all the money, and all the secrecy, one enormous challenge remained unsolved. No one yet knew whether the science itself would work. The greatest collection of scientific talent ever assembled still faced an uncomfortable truth. They were trying to build a machine that had never existed, using materials that had barely been studied, according to theories that no one had ever tested on this scale. The secret cities were ready. The world's brightest minds had arrived. Now came the hardest part of all. They had to make the impossible become reality. Chapter 4: The Secret Cities of the Atomic Age. From the air, they barely existed. A pilot flying over the mountains of northern New Mexico in 1944 might have noticed a scattering of new buildings sitting atop a high mesa. Passing over eastern Tennessee, he would have seen an enormous construction site spreading across valleys where farms had stood only a few years before. Farther west, along the Columbia River in Washington, another industrial complex seemed to emerge from an otherwise empty desert. None of them appeared on ordinary maps. Their names were rarely spoken outside military circles. Even writing them in a letter could invite unwanted attention. Yet, together, these places formed one of the largest hidden communities in American history. By 1945, more than 125,000 people worked for the Manhattan Project. Only a tiny fraction actually understood what it was. The vast majority woke up every morning, performed highly specialized jobs, returned home at night, and still had no idea they were helping build the world's first atomic bomb. It was secrecy on a scale that had never been attempted before. And surprisingly, it worked. Life at Los Alamos began with a long drive into isolation. The final miles wound through narrow mountain roads, climbing onto a broad mesa surrounded by deep canyons. Once visitors passed the guarded entrance, the outside world seemed to disappear. There was no bustling city, no towering skyline. Instead, there were wooden buildings, dusty roads, military barracks, hastily constructed family homes, laboratories, and endless views stretching across the New Mexico landscape. To outsiders, it looked almost temporary. To the scientists arriving there, it felt like stepping into another world. Many came directly from prestigious universities. Only months earlier, they had been teaching students at Berkeley, Princeton, Chicago, or Harvard. Now they found themselves living behind military checkpoints, carrying identification badges wherever they went. Their academic freedom had been replaced by security rules. Even casual conversations required caution. One physicist later joked that the easiest way to identify newcomers was by how often they accidentally asked forbidden questions. The military quickly corrected that habit. Every resident signed security agreements. Every visitor underwent investigation. Background checks became routine. Telephone calls could be monitored. Scientific notes were carefully controlled. Documents disappeared into locked safes at the end of each day. Even trash received attention. Anything containing calculations or technical information had to be destroyed under strict supervision. To modern eyes, it might seem excessive, but Groves viewed every piece of paper as a potential weapon. If Germany learned what American scientists had accomplished, years of work, and perhaps the outcome of the war itself, could be endangered. The result was a strange combination of extraordinary intellectual freedom inside laboratories and extraordinary personal restrictions outside them. Scientists debated equations openly. They challenged each other's ideas. Arguments regularly filled meeting rooms. Yet the moment they left work, many conversations simply stopped. Children were taught never to ask their parents what they did. Wives often knew little more than their husbands' job titles. Neighbors avoided discussing work over dinner. Silence became part of daily life. Even so, life had to continue. People still fell in love. Children still played games. Families still celebrated birthdays. The extraordinary mission existed alongside surprisingly ordinary routines. Every morning, school buses carried children through dusty streets, while some of the greatest scientific minds in history walked toward laboratories attempting to unlock the secrets of the atom. In the evenings, music drifted from community dances. Scientists organized hiking trips into the surrounding mountains. Baseball games became popular. Richard Feynman, one of the youngest physicists at Los Alamos, entertained friends with practical jokes, bongo drums, and an almost endless curiosity about everything around him. Feynman possessed a remarkable ability to find humor inside one of history's most serious projects. He became fascinated by the security system itself. Locked filing cabinets were supposed to protect classified documents. Instead of accepting that assumption, he began testing them. Using nothing more than patience, observation, and an understanding of human behavior, he discovered that many safes were surprisingly easy to open because people chose predictable combinations or failed to lock them properly. Rather than exposing secrets to enemies, Feynman quietly demonstrated the weaknesses to his colleagues. His playful investigations served an important purpose. Even the world's greatest secret could become vulnerable through ordinary human habits. Life in Los Alamos often balanced intense pressure with moments of unexpected normality. Children remembered sledding during snowy winters. Families gathered for picnics. Scientists played chess late into the night. Someone might spend the afternoon calculating neutron behavior capable of destroying a city and then return home in time to help with homework. The contrast was almost surreal. Oppenheimer himself embodied much of that atmosphere. Despite directing thousands of researchers, he remained approachable. He wandered between laboratories asking questions rather than issuing commands. He listened carefully to younger scientists. He encouraged discussion. Many later remembered his ability to make every researcher feel that their contribution mattered. At the same time, everyone understood the stakes. Every delay meant more time for the war to continue. Every failed experiment carried enormous consequences. Behind the relaxed conversations and evening gatherings lay relentless pressure. Failure was not considered an acceptable outcome. Hundreds of miles away, Oak Ridge presented an entirely different picture. Los Alamos attracted internationally famous scientists. Oak Ridge relied on ordinary Americans. Most had never studied nuclear physics. Many had never even heard the word isotope. They arrived because the government offered stable jobs during wartime. Construction workers came first. Then, electricians, pipe fitters, secretaries, engine operators, carpenters, laboratory assistants, young women fresh out of high school, farmers looking for better wages. Families relocated from across the country without being told exactly what awaited them. The city grew at breathtaking speed. What had been quiet countryside became one of Tennessee's largest communities almost overnight. Rows of identical houses stretched across hillsides, dormitories filled with young workers, cafeterias served thousands of meals every day. Buses carried employees to enormous industrial buildings that seemed to have no obvious purpose. Everywhere stood fences, guard towers, warning signs. Military police. Visitors frequently compared the atmosphere to entering another country. Identification badges determined where people could walk. Different colored badges granted different levels of access. One employee might spend years working only a few hundred feet away from another department, yet never receive permission to enter it. Compartmentalization defined everything. Workers learned only enough information to perform their own jobs, nothing more. A young woman operating electromagnetic equipment might believe she was helping manufacture ordinary military materials. She carefully adjusted dials according to written instructions. If the needle moved too far left, she corrected it. Too far right, another adjustment. Hour after hour. Day after day. The routine became almost mechanical. She was never told that the machine separated uranium isotopes. She was never told that every tiny adjustment influenced the production of material destined for the first atomic bomb. Years later, many Oak Ridge employees recalled the same astonishing moment. Only after Hiroshima did they finally understand what they had actually been doing. One worker remembered reading newspaper headlines and suddenly realizing that the mysterious factory where she had spent countless hours had helped change world history. Another said she felt equal measures of pride, disbelief, and sadness. Most had genuinely never known. That ignorance had been intentional. Military planners believed secrets remained safest when even loyal workers lacked the full picture. It was an approach unlike anything most Americans had ever experienced. Hanford, in Washington state, offered yet another version of wartime secrecy. Unlike Los Alamos, which centered on scientific ideas, or Oak Ridge, which focused on uranium enrichment, Hanford resembled a giant industrial frontier. The landscape itself shaped daily life. The surrounding desert felt almost endless. Hot summers baked the earth. Cold winters swept across open plains. The Columbia River became the community's lifeline. Without it, the reactors could not operate. Thousands of construction workers transformed empty land into one of the most technologically advanced industrial sites on Earth. Entire neighborhoods appeared where almost nothing had existed. The work never stopped. Factories operated day and night. Shift changes occurred around the clock. The reactors themselves demanded constant attention. Many technicians worked in conditions no previous generation had experienced. Radiation remained poorly understood. Scientists recognized its dangers but had limited practical experience managing industrial-scale nuclear facilities. Workers wore monitoring devices. Health checks became routine. New safety procedures evolved continuously. Sometimes lessons were learned the hard way. Yet morale generally remained high. Like workers across America, Hanford employees believed they were contributing to victory. Few asked detailed questions. The war provided its own explanation. One of the most remarkable aspects of the Manhattan Project was not simply its secrecy. It was how completely secrecy became part of everyday culture. Mail provides one of the clearest examples. Residents at Los Alamos did not simply write Los Alamos, New Mexico on envelopes. They couldn't. Officially, the town barely existed. Instead, letters were addressed to a post office box in nearby Santa Fe. Outgoing mail received careful inspection. Anything revealing locations, technical details, or sensitive information could be censored. Some letters simply disappeared. Families back home often grew frustrated. Why wouldn't their son explain what he was actually did? Why couldn't their daughter say where she lived? The answers remained classified. Telephone conversations offered little relief. Long-distance calls were rare and sometimes monitored. People quickly developed the habit of speaking in vague language. Work is busy. The weather is beautiful. Everyone is healthy. Beyond that, conversations became deliberately ordinary. Children adapted surprisingly well. Many simply accepted that parents never discussed work. Some believed every family lived under similar rules because they had known nothing else. Only after the war did many discover how unusual their childhoods had actually been. Even names disappeared. Projects received code words. Materials acquired harmless labels. Scientists referred to equipment using nicknames rather than technical descriptions. The goal was simple. If someone overheard a conversation, it should make little sense. Security officers constantly reminded employees that loose talk could cost lives. Posters appeared in workplaces warning against careless conversations. The message became famous throughout wartime America. The enemy is listening. Whether spies actually lurked nearby mattered less than the psychological effect. People learned to censor themselves automatically. Eventually, silence became habit. Of course, no community can survive on silence alone. People still needed friendships. Entertainment, Love Hope One, often overlooked story involves the women of the Manhattan Project. For decades, public memory focused almost entirely on famous male physicists. The reality was far more diverse. Thousands of women served as mathematicians, laboratory technicians, secretaries, chemists, machine operators, librarians, nurses, teachers, and administrators. Without them, the project simply could not have functioned. At Los Alamos, women performed highly technical calculations before electronic computers became widely available. Teams of human computers solved endless pages of mathematical problems by hand. Their calculations influenced bomb design, explosive timing, and engineering decisions. Errors could prove disastrous. Accuracy became essential. Many possessed advanced scientific training, but received little public recognition afterward. Others supported the community in quieter ways. Teachers educated children whose parents spent long hours inside laboratories. Doctors treated illnesses. Nurses handled emergencies. Clerks maintained mountains of classified paperwork. Every successful scientific breakthrough depended upon countless invisible tasks performed by people history rarely celebrated. Military personnel carried their own burdens. Young soldiers assigned to guard entrances often had no idea what they protected. Some believed ammunition was stored inside. Others guessed experimental aircraft. Very few imagined they stood watch over humanity's most revolutionary weapon. One guard later admitted he spent months wondering why so many professors required military protection. The answer astonished him after the war. The psychological weight of secrecy affected nearly everyone. Imagine dedicating years of your life to something you cannot discuss with your spouse. Imagine achieving remarkable scientific breakthroughs that cannot be published. Imagine receiving no public recognition because acknowledging your work would reveal classified information. That became daily reality. Scientists accustomed to sharing discoveries suddenly locked them inside safes. Researchers who built careers through publication disappeared from academic journals. Some worried they would never regain their reputations. Others accepted the sacrifice as necessary. Not everyone handled the isolation equally well. The combination of relentless work, military rules, family separation, and wartime uncertainty created enormous stress. Some researchers suffered exhaustion. Others questioned the morality of what they were building. Still others deliberately avoided thinking too far into the future. There would be time for ethical debates later, they told themselves. First, they had to finish the job. For many refugee scientists, the motivation remained deeply personal. They had watched Hitler destroy their homelands. Friends had disappeared. Relatives remained trapped in occupied Europe. Every calculation carried emotional weight. If the bomb ended the war before Nazi Germany developed one of its own, perhaps unimaginable suffering could be prevented. That belief sustained many through the project's most difficult months. Yet, even as these secret cities expanded and thousands of Americans unknowingly played their parts, one uncomfortable truth remained. No one, not Groves, not Oppenheimer, not even the world's greatest physicists, could say with certainty that all this effort would succeed. The factories were running, the reactors were operating, the laboratories buzzed with activity, but the atom still guarded its deepest secrets. The greatest scientific gamble in history had entered its most dangerous phase. Now the scientists had to prove that years of theory, sacrifice, and secrecy could become something real. And that challenge would push both science and engineering far beyond anything humanity had ever attempted. Chapter 5. The Impossible Science. By late 1943, the Manhattan Project had become one of the largest construction efforts in history. Entire cities had appeared where forests and deserts once stood. Massive factories consumed more electricity than many American states. Thousands of scientists, engineers, machinists, electricians, and soldiers worked around the clock behind barbed wire. From the outside, it looked as though success was only a matter of time. Inside the laboratories, however, the mood was very different. The greatest secret of the Manhattan Project was not the bomb. It was that no one knew for certain whether the bomb would actually work. Every calculation rested on theories that had never been tested at this scale. Every machine performed tasks no machine had ever attempted before. Every day brought another unexpected problem. The project was not assembling an existing weapon. It was inventing an entirely new branch of science. To understand why the challenge seemed almost impossible, it helps to begin with something so small that no human being has ever seen it directly. The atom. Everything around us, every mountain, every ocean, every tree, every person, is made from atoms. For thousands of years, people believed atoms were tiny, solid spheres, impossible to divide. Reality turned out to be much stranger. An atom is mostly empty space. At its center sits an incredibly dense nucleus, surrounded by electrons moving at astonishing speeds. Although the nucleus is unimaginably small, it contains almost all of the atom's mass. For decades, scientists assumed the nucleus itself was stable. Then, experiments began proving otherwise. Certain elements naturally released energy as they slowly broke apart over time. Radioactivity demonstrated that atoms were not completely unchangeable. But those changes happened gradually. No one imagined they could be controlled. Then came uranium. Uranium is a heavy metal found naturally in rocks deep underground. It had been known for centuries, but for most of history it seemed unremarkable. It was heavy, slightly radioactive, useful for coloring glass and ceramics, nothing more. Only in the 20th century did scientists begin realizing that uranium possessed unusual properties. The most important discovery involved two nearly identical forms of uranium. Today we call them isotopes. Think of identical twins wearing almost the same clothes. From a distance they appear indistinguishable. But one twin possesses a tiny difference that changes everything. Natural uranium consists mostly of uranium-238. Only a tiny fraction, less than 1%, is uranium-235. Chemically, they behave almost exactly alike. To ordinary laboratory equipment, they appear almost identical. Yet inside the nucleus, uranium-235 possesses one extraordinary characteristic. If struck by a neutron traveling at the right speed, the nucleus becomes unstable. Instead of remaining intact, it splits. The split happens in less than a millionth of a second. Imagine balancing a stack of dishes. One gentle tap sends the entire stack crashing apart. Something similar occurs inside the uranium nucleus. When it breaks apart, three remarkable things happen simultaneously. First, enormous amounts of energy are released. Second, the nucleus divides into smaller atoms. Third, and most importantly, it ejects additional neutrons. Those newly released neutrons can strike other uranium nuclei. Those nuclei split as well. Each one releases even more neutrons. The process repeats. This is called a chain reaction. Dominoes provide the simplest comparison. Push over one domino, it knocks over two. Those knock over four. Soon hundreds have fallen. Each individual event seems small. Together they become unstoppable. Inside uranium, however, everything happens unimaginably faster. Instead of seconds, the reactions occur in fractions of microseconds. The energy released becomes enormous. Leo Szilard immediately recognized the significance of this idea years before anyone else had demonstrated it experimentally. If enough uranium-235 could be gathered together, the chain reaction might sustain itself, not gradually. Explosively, the concept sounded straightforward. The reality was anything but. One enormous obstacle stood in the way: finding enough uranium-235. Remember that natural uranium contains less than 1% of the useful isotope. Imagine needing only white grains from an enormous pile of sand mixed almost entirely with black grains. Now imagine that every grain looks nearly identical. Separating them becomes extraordinarily difficult. Traditional chemistry couldn't help. Chemical reactions treated both isotopes almost exactly the same. Scientists needed an entirely different approach. At Oak Ridge, several competing methods emerged. One relied upon powerful magnets. Another forced uranium gas through microscopic barriers thousands upon thousands of times. Yet another spun uranium inside rapidly rotating cylinders. Each method exploited tiny differences in mass. Tiny, not large enough to see, not large enough to feel, only enough to measure with sophisticated equipment. No one knew which technique would work best. So Groves approved them all. It seemed financially reckless. But time mattered more than money. If one failed, perhaps another would succeed. If two succeeded, production would accelerate. America was gambling billions on uncertainty. Even after uranium-235 could be separated, another problem emerged. How much uranium was actually needed? Too little, and the chain reaction would simply fizzle out. Too much, assembled incorrectly, might begin reacting before the weapon was ready. Scientists called the required amount the critical mass. The phrase sounds technical. The idea is surprisingly simple. Imagine trying to keep a campfire burning. One burning stick alone quickly goes out. Add enough wood close together, however, and the fire sustains itself. Spread the logs too far apart, and the flames die. Pile them together, and the fire grows. Critical mass works similarly. If enough uranium sits close together, Enough neutrons strike neighboring atoms before escaping. The chain reaction sustains itself. Finding the exact amount became one of Los Alamos's greatest mathematical challenges. Scientists spent countless hours calculating neutron behavior. Where would neutrons travel? How many escaped? How many caused additional fission? How quickly would energy build? No one had precise answers. Each calculation required assumptions. Each assumption introduced uncertainty. Small errors could produce catastrophic consequences. Meanwhile, another possibility appeared. Perhaps uranium wasn't even the best material. Researchers discovered that inside Hanford's new nuclear reactors, uranium could be transformed into an entirely different element. Plutonium. Unlike uranium, plutonium barely existed in nature. It had to be manufactured. Inside a reactor, uranium absorbed neutrons. Through a series of nuclear transformations, some atoms gradually became plutonium-239. Remarkably, plutonium also underwent fission. In fact, it often did so even more readily than uranium-235. At first, the discovery seemed like wonderful news. Instead of depending entirely on scarce uranium-235, America now possessed another possible path toward an atomic bomb. But every solution created new problems. Plutonium behaved differently, more unpredictably. Scientists soon realized that designing one bomb would not be enough. They might need two completely different designs. At Los Alamos, laboratories buzzed day and night. Blackboards filled with equations, hallways echoed with debates. The world's brightest physicists argued passionately over neutron timing, explosive geometry, and material properties. Many disagreements became legendary. Edward Teller constantly pushed colleagues to think beyond the atomic bomb toward an even more powerful hydrogen bomb. Others insisted the immediate goal remained defeating Germany and Japan. Hans Bethe organized theoretical calculations with extraordinary precision. Richard Feynman questioned nearly every assumption. Enrico Fermi approached problems with remarkable intuition, often estimating answers mentally before lengthy calculations confirmed them. No single genius solved the Manhattan Project. Its success emerged from thousands of conversations, arguments, corrections, and revisions. Ideas improved because brilliant people challenged one another relentlessly. Sometimes discussions became heated. Scientific reputations meant little if the numbers disagreed. Nature cared nothing about prestige. Only correct answers mattered. As months passed, another uncomfortable realization spread through Los Alamos. Designing the bomb required understanding phenomena no one had ever observed. Scientists couldn't simply perform a small-scale experiment. A true nuclear explosion would either happen completely or not at all. There was no halfway demonstration. This meant every calculation carried enormous weight. One mistake might waste years of work, or produce nothing more than an expensive failure. One of the earliest bomb concepts appeared beautifully simple. Take two pieces of uranium-235, each below critical mass. Fire one into the other using conventional explosives, much like loading a cannon. Once they combined, critical mass would be reached almost instantly. The chain reaction would begin. The weapon would explode. Engineers nicknamed this the gun-type design. It seemed reliable, straightforward, almost elegant. Because uranium-235 produced relatively few stray neutrons before assembly, scientists believed the design offered a high probability of success. Attention increasingly shifted toward plutonium. Initially, researchers assumed the same gun-type approach would work there too. Then, the measurements arrived. They were devastating. Plutonium produced inside reactors contained small amounts of another isotope, plutonium-240. Unlike plutonium-239, This isotope emitted extra neutrons spontaneously. Those neutrons threatened disaster. Imagine trying to ignite fireworks with a perfectly timed fuse while random sparks constantly fly through the air. One stray spark ignites everything too early. Instead of a powerful explosion, the result becomes a weak burst scattering valuable material uselessly. Scientists call this a fizzle. The realization stunned Los Alamos. Months of planning suddenly appeared worthless. The plutonium bomb design had collapsed. There was no backup. For a time, genuine panic spread through parts of the project. Hanford's reactors were producing plutonium successfully, yet scientists suddenly lacked any reliable method for using it. Years of effort seemed in danger of becoming irrelevant. Oppenheimer refused to surrender. Instead, he reorganized the laboratory almost overnight. Every available expert focused on finding another solution. The answer, when it emerged, sounded almost impossible. Rather than firing two pieces together, why not squeeze one sphere inward? Imagine holding a hollow rubber ball. Press evenly from every direction. The ball shrinks toward its center. Scientists wondered whether carefully arranged conventional explosives might compress plutonium in exactly the same way. Compression would increase density. Greater density meant reaching critical mass almost instantly. The idea became known as implosion. On paper, it looked brilliant. In practice, it bordered on madness. Explosives normally push outward. Now they had to push inward with extraordinary precision. If one section detonated even a fraction of a second early, the sphere would become lopsided. The chain reaction would fail. Every explosive charge surrounding the plutonium core had to detonate almost simultaneously. The required precision measured millionths of a second, nothing like it had ever been attempted. Engineers had to invent explosive lenses, carefully shaped charges that focused blast waves inward exactly like glass lenses focus light. No textbook explained how to build them. No factory possessed the necessary equipment. Everything had to be invented. Again, failure followed failure. Early tests produced uneven compression. Shock waves collided incorrectly. Equipment malfunctioned. Measurements contradicted predictions. Some scientists privately wondered whether implosion might simply be impossible. Yet each setback taught another lesson. Gradually, explosive lenses improved. Detonators became more reliable. Mathematical models matched experiments more closely. Confidence slowly returned, not because the work became easier, because understanding grew. The Manhattan Project repeatedly encountered moments like this. Whenever existing technology reached its limits, scientists crossed into completely unknown territory. Need better detectors? Invent them. Need faster electronics? Design them. Need purer materials? Develop new manufacturing techniques. Again and again, engineers realized that solving one problem required creating an entirely new industry first. Even materials caused headaches. Copper shortages forced engineers to borrow nearly 14,000 tons of silver from the United States Treasury because silver conducted electricity almost as well. The Treasury found the request bewildering. Military officers weren't asking to spend money, they wanted the metal itself. Workers carefully shaped billions of dollars worth of silver into enormous electromagnetic coils for Oak Ridge's separation equipment. Every ounce was meticulously tracked. After the war, almost all of it was returned. It remains one of the strangest logistical stories of the entire project. By early 1945, remarkable progress had been achieved. Oak Ridge finally produced usable uranium-235. Hanford's reactors generated plutonium. Los Alamos possessed two radically different bomb designs. Yet uncertainty remained. No one had ever detonated a nuclear weapon. No one truly knew whether the calculations matched reality. Would the uranium bomb work? Probably. Would the plutonium implosion design succeed? Perhaps. Would either produce the enormous explosion scientists predicted? There was only one way to find out. After years of theory, engineering, arguments, failures, and impossible inventions, humanity stood on the edge of the final experiment. The next step would not take place inside a laboratory. It would happen beneath the open sky, in a remote stretch of New Mexico desert where the silence had remained undisturbed for thousands of years. Within a few months, that silence would be shattered by a flash so bright that people more than 200 miles away would wonder whether the sun had risen before dawn. And for the first time in history, humanity would discover whether it had truly learned how to unlock the power hidden inside the atom. Chapter 6. Spies, Secrets, and the Race Against Germany. For all the secrecy surrounding the Manhattan Project, one question haunted nearly every important decision. What was Germany doing? It seems almost strange in hindsight. Today we know that Nazi Germany never came close to building an atomic bomb. Its nuclear program suffered from limited resources, competing priorities, scientific disagreements, and the disruption caused by a war that increasingly turned against Hitler. But the people living through the war didn't know any of that. They couldn't. The absence of information was itself terrifying. The Manhattan Project was built as much on uncertainty as on science. Every new report from Europe was carefully examined. Every rumor about German laboratories was taken seriously. Every captured document, every intercepted conversation, every refugee scientist who escaped occupied Europe became another small piece of an enormous puzzle. America wasn't simply racing to build a bomb. It was racing against an invisible opponent. And when you cannot see your opponent, imagination often becomes your greatest enemy. Leslie Groves understood this better than almost anyone. From the moment he took command of the Manhattan Project, he viewed security as another battlefield. To Groves, spies were not a possibility. They were a certainty. He assumed that Germany, Japan, and even America's allies would all attempt to learn the project's secrets. His solution was relentless compartmentalization. Scientists knew only what they needed to know. Engineers saw only the section they worked on. Factory workers performed repetitive tasks without understanding their purpose. Even military officers often lacked access to the complete picture. It frustrated researchers accustomed to open collaboration. Yet Groves believed inconvenience was a small price to pay. The real surprise was that the greatest espionage threat did not come from Germany. It came from a country officially fighting alongside the United States. The Soviet Union. During the Second World War, the United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union were allies against Nazi Germany. American newspapers celebrated Soviet victories against Hitler. Weapons, vehicles, and food flowed east through the Lend-Lease program. Photographs showed Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin smiling together at international conferences. On the surface, they appeared united. Beneath that alliance, however, distrust never disappeared. American leaders understood that Joseph Stalin remained one of the world's most secretive dictators. Stalin, meanwhile, assumed that his Western allies were already preparing for the political struggles that would follow Germany's defeat. The partnership existed because Hitler threatened everyone. Whether it would survive victory remained uncertain. Inside the Kremlin, Stalin reached a simple conclusion: if the United States succeeded in building an atomic bomb, the balance of global power would change overnight. The Soviet Union could not afford to remain ignorant. So Soviet intelligence launched one of the most successful espionage campaigns in modern history. Unlike Hollywood films filled with dramatic rooftop chases and mysterious code words, most real espionage surrounding the Manhattan Project appeared remarkably ordinary. It relied on conversations, meetings, tiny pieces of paper, carefully memorized information. People, and the most valuable people, were often those least suspected. One of the most important was Klaus Fuchs. Fuchs hardly resembled a master spy. He was quiet, soft-spoken, highly intelligent. Born in Germany, he had fled Hitler's regime because of his anti-Nazi political beliefs. Like many refugee scientists, he found safety in Britain before eventually joining the British scientific team assigned to work with the Manhattan Project. To colleagues, he appeared deeply committed to defeating Nazi Germany. In many ways, he genuinely was. But Fuchs also believed something else. He feared a future in which only one nation possessed atomic weapons. In his mind, that monopoly represented a danger almost as great as Hitler himself. Long before the bomb was completed, Fuchs made a decision that would reshape the 20th century. He secretly began passing scientific information to Soviet intelligence. His motivations remain debated. Some historians argue he acted from ideological conviction. Others believe he feared that concentrating such overwhelming power in one country's hands would inevitably lead to catastrophe. Perhaps both explanations contain truth. Whatever his reasoning, the consequences were enormous. Fuchs possessed access to some of the Manhattan Project's most closely guarded information. He understood theoretical calculations. He attended important meetings. He knew details about plutonium implosion, uranium enrichment, and bomb design. Piece by piece, that knowledge traveled to Moscow. Remarkably, almost no one suspected him during the war. His calm personality became one of his greatest disguises. He worked hard. He cooperated fully. He rarely attracted attention. Years later, investigators would discover that one of the project's most trusted scientists had quietly become one of history's most damaging spies. He was not alone. Another astonishing case involved Theodore Hall. Hall was barely old enough to be considered an adult. A brilliant physicist, he arrived at Los Alamos at just 19 years old, making him one of the youngest scientists in the entire project. His youth made his later decisions even more surprising. Hall also concluded that allowing America to possess an atomic monopoly could destabilize the post-war world. Like Fuchs, he secretly passed information to Soviet contacts. Unlike many fictional spies motivated by money, Hall appears to have acted largely from political and moral concerns. He believed balance prevented domination. Whether that belief was wise remains one of history's enduring questions. What is certain is that the information reached Soviet scientists. Not every spy worked inside laboratories. Some served as couriers, others arranged meetings, still others transmitted coded messages. The Soviet intelligence network depended upon dozens of individuals performing small, seemingly insignificant tasks. No single person possessed the entire picture. Ironically, Soviet espionage mirrored the compartmentalization Groves had imposed upon the Manhattan Project itself. Both systems relied on fragments. One assembled a bomb, the other assembled stolen knowledge. Meanwhile, American intelligence focused elsewhere, Germany, throughout the war. Allied leaders remained desperate to discover how much progress Hitler's scientists had made. The fear was understandable. Germany had produced many of the world's greatest physicists. It had discovered nuclear fission. If any nation besides the United States could build an atomic bomb, surely it was Germany. Intelligence agencies searched relentlessly for answers. Refugees were questioned. Captured scientists were interviewed. Industrial facilities were photographed from the air. Interceptions of German communications received careful analysis. Still, certainty remained elusive. By 1944, as Allied armies pushed deeper into occupied Europe, Another opportunity emerged. Instead of merely collecting information, they could capture the scientists themselves. This mission became known as Operation Alsos. Unlike the Manhattan Project, Operation Alsos remains far less famous, yet its objectives were extraordinary. Teams of soldiers, intelligence officers, and scientific experts followed closely behind advancing Allied armies. Their mission was unlike any other military operation. They searched universities, research laboratories, industrial plants, even abandoned offices. Whenever German nuclear research appeared possible, Alsos investigators moved quickly. Sometimes they arrived only hours after fighting ended. They seized documents before they could be destroyed. They interviewed frightened researchers. They collected equipment whose significance often remained unclear until months later. Most importantly, they searched for people. The Allied race was no longer just against Germany. It had quietly become a race against the Soviet Union as well. As Nazi Germany collapsed, American and British leaders recognized that Soviet forces advancing from the east sought many of the same scientists. Whoever questioned them first might gain priceless information. One of the most famous moments occurred in southern Germany during the final weeks of the war. Several leading German physicists, including Werner Heisenberg, Otto Hahn, and Carl Friedrich von Weizsäcker, were located before Soviet troops could reach them. These men had once stood at the forefront of nuclear research. For years, Allied planners had feared they might deliver Hitler an atomic bomb. Now the truth finally emerged. Germany had never come close. Interrogations revealed a program plagued by shortages, misunderstandings, bureaucratic infighting, and strategic neglect. The scientists possessed impressive theoretical knowledge, but their government had never committed the enormous industrial resources required to transform theory into a weapon. When news of Hiroshima later reached the captured German scientists, many reacted with disbelief. At first, some refused to believe the Americans had actually succeeded. They assumed the announcement must be propaganda. Only after carefully reconsidering the scientific possibilities did they reluctantly accept reality. The race they had unknowingly lost was already over. For the Manhattan Project's leaders, the discovery brought mixed emotions. Relief came first. Germany had never been on the verge of winning. But another realization followed. Had America built the bomb to defeat an enemy who never truly threatened to build one first? History rarely provides simple answers. At the time decisions were made, uncertainty was unavoidable. Leaders act on information available in the moment, not on facts historians uncover decades later. That uncertainty shaped every major decision of the Manhattan Project. Meanwhile, Soviet intelligence celebrated quietly. Although spies had not stolen complete blueprints, they had gathered something almost as valuable. Confidence. Nuclear physics remained extraordinarily difficult. Many engineering challenges still required original Soviet solutions. Yet intelligence confirmed that America's approach worked. Scientists in Moscow no longer had to wonder whether certain ideas were practical. They knew. That knowledge eliminated years of uncertainty. Stalin immediately grasped its significance. When President Harry Truman casually hinted at the Potsdam Conference that the United States possessed an extraordinarily powerful new weapon, he expected surprise. Instead, Stalin responded calmly. Many American officials concluded that the Soviet leader simply hadn't understood. In reality, Stalin already knew far more than Truman realized. Not every technical detail, but enough. Enough to accelerate his own atomic program, enough to order Soviet scientists forward with complete urgency, enough to begin the next great technological race. The consequences unfolded astonishingly quickly. Only 4 years after Hiroshima, the Soviet Union successfully detonated its own atomic bomb in 1949. Many Americans had expected a much longer monopoly. Instead, the nuclear age became bipolar almost immediately. American intelligence was stunned. How had the Soviets moved so fast? Gradually, painful answers emerged. Investigations uncovered espionage networks. Klaus Fuchs confessed in 1950 after British investigators confronted him with mounting evidence. His admissions shocked both governments. Other names gradually surfaced. The revelations transformed public opinion. Scientists who had once been celebrated as heroes suddenly found themselves viewed with suspicion. Security procedures tightened dramatically. Political fears intensified. The Cold War entered a darker phase. Within the scientific community, the moral debate became even more complicated. Some researchers argued that Fuchs and Hall had committed unforgivable betrayals. They had violated trust, endangered national security, given a dictatorship access to humanity's most dangerous technology. Others, while condemning espionage itself, acknowledged the uncomfortable question that motivated some spies. Would a world where only one nation possessed nuclear weapons truly have been safer? Historians continue debating that question today. Supporters of nuclear deterrence argue that mutual possession prevented direct war between superpowers. Critics counter that it brought humanity repeatedly to the brink of annihilation. Both perspectives emerged from decisions made during the Manhattan Project. The irony remains extraordinary. The greatest secret project in history succeeded. Its bomb remained hidden until it exploded over Japan. Yet its deepest scientific principles quietly crossed oceans long before the first public announcement. No dramatic theft occurred. No vault was emptied. Instead, history changed through whispered conversations, handwritten notes, trusted friendships, and individuals who believed they were serving a cause greater than any single nation. By the time America celebrated its astonishing scientific triumph in 1945, another invisible race had already begun, the race to control the future of the atomic age. And before the world learned what the bomb could do in war, the scientists at Los Alamos still had one final challenge. After years of calculations, arguments, failures, and secrecy, they had to answer the question that no equation alone could resolve. Would the bomb actually work? The answer awaited them in a lonely stretch of desert known by a haunting Spanish name. Jornada del Muerto, the Journey of the Dead. Chapter 7, The Trinity Test. By the summer of 1945, the war in Europe was over. Berlin had fallen, Adolf Hitler was dead, Germany had surrendered. For many Americans, it seemed as though the greatest struggle in history was coming to an end. But on a remote stretch of desert in southern New Mexico, thousands of people continued working with the same urgency they had shown months earlier, because another war was still raging. Japan continued to fight across the Pacific. American planners expected that invading the Japanese home islands would become one of the bloodiest military operations ever attempted. Estimates varied wildly, but nearly all agreed that casualties could be enormous. The Manhattan Project had not been created for celebration. It had been created to deliver a weapon. There was only one problem. No one had ever proven that the weapon actually worked. Years of calculations suggested it would. Thousands of experiments supported the theory. Factories at Oak Ridge had finally produced enough uranium-235. Hanford's reactors had manufactured precious plutonium. Los Alamos had designed 2 different bombs. Yet everything still depended on one final question. Would physics behave exactly as expected when theory became reality? Only one experiment could answer that. The test received a name unlike any military operation before it. Trinity, No one knows with complete certainty why J. Robert Oppenheimer chose that name. Some historians believe it reflected his appreciation for the poetry of John Donne, whose writings often explored life, death, and spiritual transformation. Others think the choice carried more personal meaning. Whatever the inspiration, the name proved strangely fitting. The Trinity test would divide history into two eras: the world before nuclear weapons and the world after them. Finding the right location had required months of searching. The site needed to be isolated enough that a field test, or a successful one, would endanger as few people as possible. It needed predictable weather, open terrain, enough room to observe the explosion from many miles away. Eventually, planners selected a barren region inside the Alamogordo bombing range. The Spanish name for the surrounding valley added an eerie sense of destiny: Jornada del Muerto, the journey of the dead. Centuries earlier, Spanish explorers had given the region that name because crossing it meant traveling for nearly 100 miles without reliable water. Many who attempted the journey never survived. Now another kind of journey was about to begin. Construction crews transformed the empty desert into an enormous outdoor laboratory. A steel tower rose 100 feet into the air. The bomb would be suspended at its top. Observation bunkers appeared several miles away. Instrument stations spread across the landscape. High-speed cameras, pressure gauges, radiation detectors, blast sensors. Miles of cables stretched across the desert floor, connecting every instrument to recording equipment. Scientists wanted to measure everything. No explosion in history had ever demanded so many witnesses or so many measuring devices. The weapon itself was nicknamed the Gadget. The name sounded almost playful. In reality, it represented the most sophisticated machine humanity had ever built. Unlike the uranium bomb, whose relatively simple gun-type design inspired confidence, the Gadget relied upon the far more complicated plutonium implosion system. Dozens of explosive lenses surrounded a small plutonium core. Every charge had to detonate almost perfectly simultaneously. If even one section fired too early or too late, the entire device could fail. Years of work rested upon millionths of a second. As the date approached, nervousness spread throughout Los Alamos. Some scientists appeared calm. Others barely slept. The pressure became almost unbearable. Failure carried consequences far beyond embarrassment. If the test failed, there might not be enough plutonium to attempt another quickly. Military plans against Japan would change dramatically. The credibility of years of scientific work could collapse overnight. Even General Leslie Groves, usually confident to the point of stubbornness, understood the risks. He had spent billions of dollars, built entire cities, directed more than 100,000 workers. Congress knew almost nothing about the project. President Truman expected results. Everything depended on a device no one had ever tested. Yet among all the practical concerns, another rumor quietly circulated through the project. It sounded almost absurd, and yet some people couldn't completely dismiss it. Could the explosion ignite the Earth's atmosphere? The fear originated during theoretical discussions months earlier. Physicists had considered whether temperatures produced by a nuclear explosion might trigger uncontrolled fusion reactions involving nitrogen in the atmosphere. If that happened, the consequences would be unimaginable. The entire planet could become engulfed. Scientists carefully analyzed the possibility. Detailed calculations showed the scenario was effectively impossible. The atmosphere simply could not sustain such a reaction. Most researchers accepted the mathematics. Still, mathematics had never before been tested against an exploding atomic bomb. Richard Feynman later recalled that despite the reassuring calculations, the thought lingered in the back of some minds. not because they truly expected disaster, but because humanity had never ventured into territory like this before. When confronting the unknown, even tiny doubts become difficult to silence. As July 16 approached, nature introduced another complication. Thunderstorms, heavy rain swept across the desert. Lightning flashed over the Jornada del Muerto. The steel tower holding the gadget became an obvious concern. No one wanted lightning striking the world's first atomic bomb. The scheduled test time slipped repeatedly. Meteorologists studied every cloud. Military officers checked forecasts almost continuously. At around 2 o'clock in the morning, conditions slowly began improving. The countdown resumed. Across the desert, observers settled into carefully prepared positions. Some lay face down inside trenches. Others occupied reinforced bunkers nearly 6 miles from ground zero. Senior scientists gathered at base camp approximately 10 miles away. Still, others watched from even greater distances. Everyone received dark protective goggles. Instructions emphasized one point above all others: do not look directly at the explosion. Even from miles away, the light could damage eyesight. Many ignored that advice. Curiosity proved stronger than caution. One observer famously coated a piece of welding glass with additional layers to reduce the brightness. Others planned to watch indirectly through reflections. General Groves remained outwardly composed. Inside, he later admitted, the uncertainty weighed heavily upon him. If the bomb failed, explaining the disaster would become almost impossible. If it succeeded, the world would never be the same. Oppenheimer appeared noticeably thinner than usual. Years of relentless work had taken their toll. Colleagues remembered him chain-smoking cigarettes, speaking quietly, and constantly reviewing final details. No calculation remained to check. No design remained to revise. The scientists had reached the point where nature alone would provide the answer. At 5:10 a.m., the final countdown entered its last minutes. Conversation largely stopped. The desert fell silent. Some people later said they could hear only the wind. Others remembered the strange stillness before dawn. 5 minutes. Technicians verified electrical connections one last time. 3 minutes. Observers adjusted protective goggles. 1 minute. Someone quietly announced the remaining seconds over loudspeakers. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. At precisely 5:29 and 45 seconds in the morning, the desert disappeared. For an instant, darkness gave way to a light unlike anything human eyes had ever witnessed. People standing miles away instinctively turned their heads. Some thought the sun had exploded. Others later said the flash seemed white, then blue, then violet, then orange, all within moments. The fireball expanded with astonishing speed, brighter than dozens of suns, hotter than the surface of the sun itself. Sand beneath the tower instantly melted into green radioactive glass, later named trinitite. The steel tower simply vanished, not collapsed, not broken. Gone, the surrounding desert seemed to lift upward beneath the growing sphere of fire. Then something unexpected happened. Silence. Because light travels faster than sound, observers watched the explosion in complete stillness. The mushroom cloud climbed higher and higher, twisting into shapes no one had ever seen before. Colors shifted constantly: purple, gold, deep orange. Gray, the cloud rose through the morning sky until it reached tens of thousands of feet. Many spectators forgot to breathe. Then, nearly 40 seconds later, the shockwave arrived. It struck with tremendous force. Windows rattled far away. Concrete bunkers vibrated. The sound rolled across the desert like endless thunder. Echoes bounced between distant mountains. People who had remained perfectly calm during the countdown suddenly realized what they had witnessed. Theoretical physics had become reality. For a few moments, almost no one spoke. Then, reactions began pouring out. Some scientists cheered, others applauded spontaneously. A few embraced each other. One observer shouted, "It worked." Another simply laughed in disbelief. Enrico Fermi performed one of the simplest scientific experiments imaginable. As the blast wave approached, he dropped tiny pieces of paper into the air. By observing how far they moved, he quickly estimated the explosion's power. His remarkably accurate calculation demonstrated why colleagues admired his intuition. General Groves felt something close to relief. Years of pressure lifted almost instantly. The project had succeeded. The enormous gamble, financially, scientifically, politically, had paid off. Military planners now possessed a weapon unlike anything in history. For Oppenheimer, the emotions proved more complicated. He later recalled that famous line from the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Whether the words came immediately or later during reflection, they captured something many participants struggled to express. Triumph mixed with unease, pride intertwined with dread. Years of intellectual achievement suddenly revealed consequences extending far beyond science. Physicist Isidore Rabi later remembered seeing Oppenheimer's face. He believed his friend understood, almost instantly, that the bomb's success represented not the end of a project, but the beginning of an entirely new chapter in human history. The calculations had been correct. That realization carried extraordinary weight. News of the explosion remained secret. Official explanations described an ammunition dump accident after nearby residents reported seeing the brilliant flash. Most Americans accepted the story without question. Only a handful of people knew the truth. President Harry Truman learned of Trinity while attending the Potsdam Conference in Germany. The coded message he received was deliberately understated. The operation was successful beyond the most optimistic expectations. Those few words transformed his position at the negotiating table. Until that morning, the United States possessed only the promise of an atomic bomb. Now, it possessed proof. Military strategy changed immediately. Plans for invading Japan remained under review, but another option had suddenly become real. Diplomacy changed as well. Truman now met with Winston Churchill and Joseph Stalin, knowing that America alone possessed a working nuclear weapon. Although Stalin concealed his reaction, Soviet intelligence had already informed him that such a breakthrough was likely. Even so, Trinity accelerated Soviet determination to build its own bomb. The nuclear arms race had effectively begun before the Second World War had even ended. The scientists at Los Alamos celebrated briefly. There was little time for reflection. Only enough plutonium existed for one test. The next bomb would not explode in an empty desert. It would be used in war. Within weeks, specially modified aircraft would carry 2 different atomic bombs across the Pacific. The world had crossed a threshold from which there could be no return. What had begun as a desperate race against Nazi Germany was about to become the most controversial military decision of the 20th century. And once the first bomb fell on a living city, the meaning of the Trinity test would be understood not only by scientists gathered in a remote desert, but by the entire world. Chapter 8. Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Just a few weeks after the desert of New Mexico lit up brighter than the sun, the future of the world shifted to another continent. The Trinity test had answered the scientific question. The bomb worked. Now came a far more difficult question. Should it be used? No equation could answer that. No laboratory experiment could resolve it. The decision belonged not to physicists, but to politicians and military leaders carrying the weight of an entire world war. In July 1945, President Harry Truman crossed the Atlantic to attend the Potsdam Conference outside Berlin. The setting itself reflected the strange moment in history. Germany had surrendered only weeks earlier. Much of Berlin lay in ruins. Entire neighborhoods had been reduced to broken bricks and twisted steel. Roads were crowded with refugees. Smoke still rose from destroyed factories. The war in Europe was over, but its scars stretched as far as the eye could see. Truman met with British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, later replaced during the conference by Clement Attlee after Britain's general election, and Soviet leader Joseph Stalin. Officially, they gathered to discuss the post-war order. How would Germany be governed? How would Europe be rebuilt? What would happen to occupied territories? Yet beneath every conversation was another issue that only Truman fully understood. The United States now possessed a weapon unlike anything in history. When news of the successful Trinity test reached him, Truman's confidence noticeably changed. Several advisors later remarked that he appeared more decisive in negotiations after learning the bomb had worked, not because he intended to threaten anyone directly, but because America's position had fundamentally changed. For the first time, one nation possessed the ability to destroy an entire city with a single aircraft. At that moment, no other country could do the same. Still, the immediate concern remained Japan. Although Germany had surrendered in May, the Pacific War continued with extraordinary intensity. By mid-1945, Japan's military situation was becoming desperate. Its navy had largely ceased to exist as an effective fighting force. American submarines had devastated shipping routes. Bombing campaigns destroyed factories, transportation networks, and large sections of major cities. Food shortages worsened across the country. Fuel supplies nearly disappeared. Industry struggled to function. From the perspective of many American military planners, Japan had already lost the war. The unanswered question was whether Japan's leaders accepted that reality. Evidence suggested they did not. The battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa deeply influenced American thinking. On Iwo Jima, roughly 21,000 Japanese defenders fought almost to the last man. Only a few hundred survived. American forces suffered thousands of casualties capturing an island barely 8 square miles in size. Then came Okinawa. The fighting lasted nearly 3 months. More than 12,000 Americans were killed. Tens of thousands were wounded. Japanese military deaths exceeded 100,000. Civilian casualties reached catastrophic levels. Kamikaze attacks intensified. Pilots deliberately crashed explosive-filled aircraft into Allied ships. The battles convinced many American leaders that an invasion of Japan itself could become even bloodier. Plans already existed. Operation Downfall envisioned a massive invasion of the Japanese home islands in multiple stages. Hundreds of thousands of Allied troops would participate. Japanese defenses, meanwhile, prepared for a final national struggle. Military leaders mobilized soldiers, reservists, students, and civilians. Weapons were stockpiled. Coastal fortifications expanded. Everyone expected enormous casualties. Exactly how many remains one of history's most debated questions. Contemporary estimates varied dramatically. Some predicted hundreds of thousands of Allied casualties. Others anticipated millions of Japanese military and civilian deaths. No one knew for certain. War rarely provides certainty. It provides probabilities. Against this backdrop, Truman faced one of the most consequential decisions any political leader has ever confronted. Several options lay before him. Continue conventional bombing. Maintain the naval blockade. Invade Japan. Wait for Soviet entry into the Pacific War. Or use the atomic bomb. Each carried terrible consequences. there was no bloodless solution. Inside the American government, opinions differed. Some military leaders believed Japan was already close to collapse. Others insisted only overwhelming force would compel surrender. Several Manhattan Project scientists urged demonstrating the bomb before international observers rather than dropping it directly on a city. Others feared a demonstration might fail, weakening its psychological impact. The debate reflected genuine uncertainty. No one could predict exactly how Japanese leaders would respond. Meanwhile, a committee had already begun considering potential targets. The criteria were practical rather than symbolic. The city needed military significance. It should contain important industrial or transportation facilities. It should remain relatively undamaged so the bomb's effects could be clearly measured. Geography mattered as well. Surrounding terrain influenced how blast waves traveled. Several cities appeared on early lists. Kyoto, one of Japan's cultural and historical centers, ranked highly because of its size and industrial capacity. Secretary of War Henry Stimson strongly objected. He had visited Kyoto before the war and believed destroying Japan's ancient cultural capital would create lasting bitterness. After repeated intervention, Kyoto was removed. That decision preserved one of Japan's most treasured cities. Attention shifted elsewhere. Hiroshima eventually emerged as the primary target. Situated on a broad delta beside the inland sea, Hiroshima served as an important military headquarters and logistics center. Its surrounding hills also made it an ideal location for studying blast effects. Unlike many Japanese cities devastated by conventional bombing, Hiroshima remained largely intact. Few residents understood why. Some believed American bombers ignored the city because it lacked strategic importance. In reality, the opposite was true. Its preservation reflected careful planning. Early on the morning of August 6, 1945, a specially modified B-29 bomber named Enola Gay departed Tinian Island in the Pacific. Inside rested the uranium bomb. The weapon carried a deceptively simple nickname: Little Boy. Unlike the Trinity device, Little Boy used the gun-type uranium design. Scientists felt sufficiently confident that it required no prior test. There simply wasn't enough uranium-235 available to conduct one. If their calculations proved wrong, the weapon would fail over Hiroshima. As the aircraft approached Japan, life below continued almost normally. Children walked toward school, workers began morning routines, streetcars moved through city streets, hospitals admitted patients. The air raid warning had been lifted because only a few American aircraft appeared overhead. Many residents paid little attention. At 8:15 in the morning, Little Boy was released. 43 seconds later, it detonated approximately 1,900 feet above the city. The flash arrived first. Brighter than anyone could comprehend, people miles away instinctively shielded their eyes. Temperatures near the center reached several thousand degrees almost instantly. Buildings disappeared. Wood ignited spontaneously. Concrete cracked. Steel bent. Human shadows became permanently etched onto walls where intense heat bleached surrounding surfaces. Then came the blast. A wall of compressed air raced outward faster than hurricane-force winds. Thousands of buildings collapsed within seconds. Glass shattered miles away. The city transformed almost instantly. Fires erupted everywhere. Communication vanished. Hospitals were destroyed. Roads became blocked with debris. Survivors wandered through smoke, searching desperately for family members. Many had no idea what had happened. There had been no prolonged bombing raid, no wave of attacking aircraft. One bomb had produced destruction beyond imagination. Back aboard Enola Gay, the crew watched an enormous mushroom cloud climb toward the stratosphere. Even the men who had trained for the mission struggled to comprehend what they witnessed. The cloud continued rising until it towered over the landscape. Far below, Hiroshima had ceased to function as a city. News spread slowly. Japanese authorities initially lost contact with Hiroshima altogether. Railway communications failed. Telephone lines went silent. Military officials struggled to understand why an entire city had suddenly disappeared from the national communication network. Eventually, reconnaissance aircraft confirmed the unimaginable. A single bomb had devastated Hiroshima. President Truman announced the attack later that day. The world learned that a new kind of weapon existed. His statement warned Japan that further destruction would follow if surrender did not come. International reactions ranged from astonishment to horror. Many Americans celebrated, believing the bomb would end the war and save countless lives that would otherwise be lost during an invasion. Others immediately sensed profound moral questions. Scientists at Los Alamos experienced conflicting emotions. Some expressed relief that years of work had finally ended the war they had feared since Hitler's rise. Others became increasingly troubled after seeing photographs and hearing survivor accounts. For Oppenheimer, celebration felt impossible. He understood more clearly than almost anyone what humanity had entered. Yet Japan still did not surrender immediately. Military leaders remained divided. Some hoped the Soviet Union might mediate peace negotiations. Others insisted on continuing resistance. Then events accelerated dramatically. On the night of August 8, exactly as promised months earlier at Yalta, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan. Within hours, massive Soviet armies invaded Japanese-held Manchuria. The offensive shattered one of Japan's largest remaining military forces. Suddenly, Japan faced attack from both east and west. The strategic situation collapsed almost overnight. Less than 24 hours later came another atomic mission. This time, the target was different. The bomb was different as well. Fat Man carried the plutonium implosion design first proven at Trinity. Originally, the primary target had been Kokura. Cloud cover obscured the city. After repeated bombing runs failed to provide sufficient visibility, the aircraft turned toward its secondary target. Nagasaki, geography intervened. Unlike Hiroshima's relatively flat terrain, Nagasaki lay within narrow valleys surrounded by hills. Those hills partially contained the blast, reducing destruction in some areas while concentrating it in others. At 11:02 a.m. on August 9th, Fat Man exploded over the city. Once again, unimaginable devastation followed. Factories vanished. Neighborhoods disappeared. Hospitals overflowed with injured survivors. Japan now faced 2 atomic bombings and a Soviet invasion within 4 days. Inside Tokyo, intense debate erupted. Some military leaders argued for continuing the war despite everything. Others concluded further resistance would only guarantee national destruction. For the first time in Japanese history, Emperor Hirohito personally intervened in government deliberations. His decision proved decisive. Japan would accept surrender. On August 15, 1945, the emperor addressed the nation by radio. Most Japanese citizens had never heard his voice before. His formal language avoided the word surrender, but the meaning became unmistakable. The war was over. Crowds celebrated across Allied nations. Church bells rang. Factories stopped work. Strangers embraced in city streets. After nearly 6 years of global conflict and tens of millions of deaths, the Second World War had ended. Yet even amid celebration, difficult questions remained. Those questions have never entirely disappeared. Were the atomic bombings militarily necessary? The debate continues more than 80 years later, not because historians lack evidence, but because history rarely reduces itself to simple answers. One perspective argues that the bombings prevented an invasion likely to cost hundreds of thousands of Allied lives and perhaps millions of Japanese military and civilian casualties. Supporters point to Okinawa, Iwo Jima, and Japan's preparations for homeland defense as evidence that the fighting would have continued with extraordinary ferocity. Another perspective emphasizes Japan's deteriorating military position, the devastating conventional bombing campaign, the naval blockade, and the Soviet declaration of war. Some historians argue these factors might have compelled surrender without atomic attacks. Others believe the Soviet invasion carried greater influence than Hiroshima or Nagasaki. Still others argue the combination of all three shocks, Hiroshima, the Soviet offensive, and Nagasaki, finally convinced Japanese leaders that continued resistance had become impossible. The evidence supports elements of each interpretation. That complexity matters. History is often presented as a courtroom where one verdict settles every argument. Reality is less comfortable. Leaders make decisions amid uncertainty, incomplete information, and immense pressure. Their choices carry consequences impossible to fully predict. The atomic bombings ended one war. They also began another era. The world had witnessed a weapon capable of destroying entire cities in moments. No nation could forget what had happened. Not the United States. Not the Soviet Union. Not the scientists who built the bomb. And certainly not the survivors who lived through its unimaginable effects. In the months ahead, many of the men and women who had devoted years to creating the atomic bomb would begin asking themselves a haunting question. Now that the weapon existed, what had they actually unleashed? Chapter 9: Victory, Guilt, and the Birth of the Nuclear Age. When Japan announced its surrender in August 1945, millions of people around the world celebrated. For soldiers, it meant going home. For families, it meant loved ones would no longer be sent into battle. Factories that had spent years producing tanks, aircraft, and ammunition began preparing for peacetime production. Cities lit their streets again. Church bells rang. Crowds filled Times Square, London's Trafalgar Square, and countless town squares across America. The Second World War had ended. But for many of the men and women of the Manhattan Project, the celebrations felt strangely incomplete. For 3 years, they had lived inside one of history's greatest secrets. Every waking hour had revolved around a single objective: build the bomb before Nazi Germany. That mission had defined their lives. Then Germany surrendered. The bomb was completed anyway. It was used against Japan. The war ended. And suddenly, many of the scientists found themselves asking a question they had deliberately postponed. Now what? The laboratories at Los Alamos, once alive with constant urgency, became unusually quiet. The endless calculations stopped. Emergency meetings disappeared. Scientists who had barely left their offices during the war suddenly packed their belongings and returned to universities they had not seen in years. Some resumed teaching, others returned to theoretical research. Many attempted to rebuild ordinary lives. Yet ordinary life proved difficult after participating in something extraordinary. The Manhattan Project had changed them. Some carried pride, some carried doubt. Many carried both at the same time. No one embodied that conflict more than J. Robert Oppenheimer. During the war, colleagues had admired his remarkable ability to unite brilliant but fiercely independent personalities. He had inspired physicists, chemists, engineers, soldiers, and machinists to pursue a common goal. Without his leadership, the Manhattan Project would almost certainly have taken much longer, yet victory brought him little peace. In public, Oppenheimer often defended the decision to build the bomb. He reminded audiences of the circumstances that existed in 1942 when no one knew whether Hitler might acquire nuclear weapons first. He believed the project had been necessary under those conditions, but necessity did not erase emotional consequences. Soon after the war, Oppenheimer visited President Harry Truman at the White House. The meeting became famous for one deeply uncomfortable exchange. Oppenheimer confessed that he felt he had blood on my hands. Truman reacted sharply. The president believed responsibility for using the bomb rested with him alone. He reportedly handed Oppenheimer a handkerchief and told him to wipe his hands. Later, Truman privately remarked that he never wished to see the physicist again. The conversation revealed something important. Scientists and political leaders viewed responsibility through entirely different lenses. Oppenheimer had helped make the weapon possible. Truman had ordered its use. Neither could escape history, yet each carried the burden differently. As months turned into years, Oppenheimer increasingly argued that atomic weapons required international control. He feared a future in which multiple nations built ever more powerful bombs without meaningful limits. The danger, he believed, had not ended with Hiroshima. It had only begun. Albert Einstein experienced his own complicated reckoning. Ironically, the world's most famous physicist had never worked on the Manhattan Project itself. Because of security concerns and questions about his political associations, he remained outside the classified program. Yet his letter to Roosevelt in 1939 had helped set everything in motion. Without that letter, would America have launched such an ambitious effort so quickly? Einstein wrestled with that question for the rest of his life. He repeatedly expressed regret that nuclear weapons had become necessary. He also insisted that his greatest fear had always been a Nazi bomb. If I had known, he later reflected, that the Germans would not succeed, I would have done nothing. The statement has often been quoted because it captures the uncertainty at the heart of the Manhattan Project. History after the fact appears clear. History while it is happening rarely does. Many other scientists experienced similar emotional struggles. Leo Szilard, who had first imagined the possibility of a nuclear chain reaction years earlier, became one of the strongest advocates for international arms control. James Franck and several colleagues argued before Hiroshima that the bomb should first be demonstrated before representatives of multiple nations rather than dropped directly on a city. Their proposal ultimately failed to change government policy. After the war, they continued urging political leaders to consider the long-term consequences of nuclear weapons. Others reached different conclusions. Some believed ending the war quickly justified the bombings. Many had watched Europe collapse into dictatorship. Some had lost family members in the Holocaust. Others had escaped fascist persecution only because they fled in time. For them, defeating the Axis powers remained the defining moral priority. The atomic bomb represented a terrible weapon used during a terrible war. The ethical questions were painful, but they believed allowing Hitler or Imperial Japan additional time to continue fighting would have produced even greater suffering. There was no universal scientific opinion. The Manhattan Project had united brilliant minds around a technical challenge. Peace revealed deep philosophical differences. Yet, while scientists debated ethics, world politics moved with astonishing speed. The alliance that had defeated Nazi Germany began falling apart almost immediately. Even before Japan formally surrendered, disagreements between the United States and the Soviet Union had become increasingly obvious. Europe now lay divided. American forces occupied the West. Soviet armies controlled much of Eastern Europe. Mutual suspicion replaced wartime cooperation. The atomic bomb intensified every disagreement. For a brief moment, the United States possessed something unprecedented, a nuclear monopoly. No other nation could threaten American cities with atomic weapons. Some officials viewed that monopoly as an enormous strategic advantage. Others believed it might encourage diplomatic restraint. Still others feared it would prove temporary. Joseph Stalin belonged firmly to the last group. The Soviet leader had no intention of allowing the United States to remain the world's only nuclear power. Even before Hiroshima, Soviet intelligence had already delivered valuable information from spies embedded within the Manhattan Project. Now Stalin ordered Soviet scientists to accelerate every aspect of their own atomic program. Resources poured into laboratories. Entire research centers appeared almost overnight. The Soviet project mirrored many features of the Manhattan Project itself: massive industrial investment, extreme secrecy, military oversight, thousands of workers, the same sense of national urgency. Yet Soviet scientists also possessed one important advantage. They already knew the Americans had succeeded. Espionage had not magically solved every engineering challenge. Designing and manufacturing an atomic bomb still demanded extraordinary scientific skill. But stolen information eliminated countless dead ends. Researchers could focus their attention on approaches already proven effective. America still led. The Soviet Union was catching up much faster than many expected. Then came the shock. On August 29, 1949, at a remote test site in Kazakhstan, the Soviet Union successfully detonated its first atomic bomb. The explosion stunned Washington. Many American officials had assumed the Soviet program remained years away. Instead, the nuclear monopoly had lasted barely 4 years. President Truman announced the Soviet test to the American public weeks later. The world entered an entirely new strategic reality. No longer would only one nation possess atomic weapons. Now 2 superpowers faced one another, each capable of unimaginable destruction. The Cold War had truly begun. The consequences reached far beyond military planning. Foreign policy changed, diplomacy changed, scientific research changed. Even ordinary daily life began changing. School children would eventually practice nuclear attack drills. Families would build backyard fallout shelters. Governments would calculate the survivability of entire cities. The bomb had become part of everyday political thinking. Ironically, the weapon originally designed to prevent Nazi domination now shaped a rivalry between former allies. Yet the race did not stop with atomic bombs. Some scientists believed even greater power remained hidden inside the atom. During the Manhattan Project, Edward Teller had repeatedly advocated pursuing a weapon based not on nuclear fission, but nuclear fusion. Instead of splitting heavy atoms apart, fusion joined lighter atoms together. The same process powered the sun. In theory, fusion could release vastly more energy than fission. Many colleagues considered Teller's ideas premature during the war. Building one atomic bomb already seemed difficult enough. The hydrogen bomb appeared almost unimaginable. After 1949, imagination became policy. Fear of Soviet progress convinced American leaders to move forward. Research accelerated, debates intensified. Oppenheimer opposed rushing into hydrogen bomb development. He believed the new weapon represented a dangerous escalation whose military value remained uncertain. Others strongly disagreed. If the Soviet Union might eventually build such a bomb, they argued, America had to build one first. Once again, fear drove innovation. In 1952, the United States detonated the first successful hydrogen bomb. Its explosive power dwarfed the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The difference was almost impossible to comprehend. Imagine comparing a campfire to a volcanic eruption. The hydrogen bomb released energy measured not in thousands of tons of TNT, but in millions. The Soviet Union followed less than a year later. The nuclear arms race entered another level entirely. What had begun as a race to build a single weapon before Hitler now evolved into a competition with no obvious finish line. Each technological breakthrough encouraged another. Larger warheads, longer-range bombers, intercontinental ballistic missiles, submarines capable of launching nuclear weapons from beneath the oceans. Every innovation changed military planning. Every advance forced rivals to respond. The logic seemed impossible to escape. If one side gained an advantage, the other had to restore balance. Over time, an unsettling idea emerged: mutually assured destruction. The phrase sounded almost absurd. Its meaning was even more disturbing. Both superpowers accumulated enough nuclear weapons that any full-scale war would destroy both societies. Victory itself became almost meaningless. Paradoxically, many strategists argued this terrifying balance helped prevent direct war between the United States and the Soviet Union. Neither side could attack without guaranteeing its own devastation. Whether this logic preserved peace or merely postponed catastrophe remains one of history's most debated questions. Throughout these changes, the scientists of the Manhattan Project watched with mixed emotions. Some continued advising governments, others withdrew from military work entirely. Many dedicated the rest of their careers to promoting arms control. Oppenheimer became one of the most visible public intellectuals in America, speaking thoughtfully about science, responsibility, and international cooperation. Yet his growing opposition to aspects of the nuclear arms race would eventually place him under suspicion during the intense anti-communist atmosphere of the 1950s. The man once celebrated as the father of the atomic bomb would find his loyalty questioned by the very government he had served. It was one of the great ironies of the Cold War. The creators of America's greatest wartime achievement increasingly found themselves caught in the political storms unleashed by their own success. The Manhattan Project had officially ended. Its construction sites no longer represented history's greatest secret. Its discoveries filled textbooks. Its technologies spread into power generation, medicine, and scientific research. But its most important legacy was not a laboratory or a city. It was a new reality. For the first time since the beginning of civilization, humanity possessed the ability to destroy itself through its own inventions. Every international crisis would now unfold beneath that shadow. Every generation born after 1945 would grow up in a world shaped by decisions made inside secret laboratories, hidden factories, and isolated deserts. The Manhattan Project had won a race. But in doing so, it had started another, one that the world is still running today. Chapter 10: The Legacy That Still Shapes Our World. On most mornings, the Jornada del Muerto looks much as it did before the summer of 1945. The desert is quiet. The wind moves across the dry grass. Mountains stand motionless on the horizon. Coyotes still roam the valleys. At first glance, there is little to suggest that this isolated landscape became one of the most important places in human history. Only a simple obelisk marks the exact location where the steel tower once stood. The tower is gone. The bomb is gone. The scientists are gone. But the consequences remain. Every generation since July 16, 1945, has lived in the shadow of that single morning. The Trinity test lasted only a fraction of a second. Its legacy has lasted a lifetime, and it continues to shape the world in ways that even Oppenheimer and his colleagues could never have imagined. When people think about the Manhattan Project, they usually think about the atomic bomb. That is understandable. It was the project's purpose. It changed the course of the Second World War and transformed global politics. Yet the Manhattan Project also did something much broader. It changed the way nations approached science itself. Before the war, scientific research was often the work of universities, small laboratories, or private inventors. Great discoveries certainly happened, but they were usually made by relatively small teams working with limited resources. The Manhattan Project introduced a completely different model. It demonstrated that governments could bring together thousands of scientists, engineers, military officers, manufacturers, universities, and private companies into one coordinated effort. Money, talent, and industry could all be directed toward solving a single problem. The scale was unprecedented. The results were undeniable. After the war, governments around the world adopted that model. Large national laboratories became permanent institutions. Federal funding for scientific research expanded dramatically. Organizations that had barely existed before the war suddenly became central to national policy. In the United States, places like Los Alamos, Oak Ridge, Argonne, and Lawrence Livermore evolved into long-term research centers rather than temporary wartime projects. The Manhattan Project had proven that scientific breakthroughs could become matters of national strategy. That lesson never disappeared. Its influence reached far beyond nuclear weapons. Many of the techniques developed during the project found peaceful uses that continue today. Nuclear medicine became one of the clearest examples. Researchers discovered that radioactive isotopes could help diagnose diseases, trace biological processes, and destroy certain forms of cancer with remarkable precision. Today, millions of patients benefit from treatments and imaging technologies that grew from research originally conducted during the atomic age. Doctors can examine organs without major surgery. Radiation therapies save lives every day. A technology born in war became an essential part of modern medicine. The same pattern appeared in energy production. Scientists who had learned to control nuclear chain reactions soon realized those reactions could generate electricity instead of explosions. The first commercial nuclear power plants appeared during the 1950s. Supporters viewed them as a revolutionary new source of energy capable of producing enormous amounts of electricity without burning fossil fuels. Critics warned about accidents, radioactive waste, and the risks of spreading nuclear technology. That debate continues today. Some nations embraced nuclear power, others rejected it, still others continue searching for safer reactor designs. The questions raised by the Manhattan Project remain far from settled. The project also accelerated advances in engineering unlike anything seen before. Building enrichment plants at Oak Ridge required entirely new manufacturing techniques. Hanford demanded reactors larger than anything previously attempted. Los Alamos forced scientists to create instruments capable of measuring events lasting only millionths of a second. Each challenge pushed technology forward. Precision machining improved. Materials science advanced. Electronics became more sophisticated. High-speed photography evolved rapidly. Many wartime innovations later found applications across civilian industries. Even computing owes part of its history to the Manhattan Project. The scientists faced mathematical problems far too complicated for ordinary calculation. Teams of human computers worked endlessly with slide rules and mechanical calculators. Soon, engineers recognized the need for faster methods. Early electronic computing machines emerged during this same period, driven in part by wartime demands. Within a few decades, those primitive computers evolved into technologies that now fit inside our pockets. The connection is indirect but unmistakable. The Manhattan Project belonged to a generation that transformed scientific calculation forever. Perhaps its greatest institutional legacy lies in the relationship between science and government. Before 1945, scientists often advised political leaders. After 1945, they became permanent participants in national security decisions. Presidents increasingly relied on scientific advisors. Military planning incorporated physicists, engineers, chemists, and mathematicians. Questions once confined to laboratories became matters of diplomacy. Scientific knowledge itself became a form of geopolitical power. That relationship brought remarkable opportunities. It also created lasting tensions. How much influence should scientists have over political decisions? Should researchers bear responsibility for how governments use their discoveries? Can scientific progress ever remain separate from military competition? These questions first emerged during the Manhattan Project. They have never disappeared. Nowhere is that more obvious than in nuclear deterrence. The world that emerged after 1945 differed fundamentally from every previous era. Major wars between nuclear powers carried risks unlike anything history had known. The possibility of mutual destruction reshaped military strategy. Entire alliances formed around nuclear guarantees. Missiles remained on constant alert. Submarines quietly patrolled the oceans carrying weapons powerful enough to devastate civilizations. Paradoxically, many historians argue that these terrifying capabilities helped prevent another direct war between the United States and the Soviet Union. Others believe humanity simply survived through luck. History offers evidence for both interpretations. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 demonstrated just how close the world could come to catastrophe. For 13 days, nuclear war appeared frighteningly possible. Decisions made by a handful of leaders affected billions of lives. Fortunately, diplomacy prevailed. That experience reinforced another lesson born from the Manhattan Project. Technology alone cannot guarantee security. Communication matters. Restraint matters. Trust, even between rivals, matters. Over the decades, nations gradually recognized that unlimited nuclear competition threatened everyone. Arms control agreements began emerging. Treaties limited certain categories of weapons. Testing moved underground before many forms of testing were restricted altogether. International organizations expanded efforts to monitor nuclear materials and discourage proliferation. None of these agreements eliminated danger, but they reflected an important realization. Managing nuclear weapons required cooperation as much as competition. The same lesson echoes in today's debates over transformative technologies. Artificial intelligence, biotechnology, quantum computing, autonomous weapons. Each promises extraordinary benefits. Each also raises profound questions. Who controls these technologies? How quickly should they develop? What safeguards are necessary? How much responsibility belongs to governments? How much belongs to private companies? How much belongs to scientists themselves? These conversations sound remarkably familiar. Nearly every major ethical debate surrounding advanced technology today echoes discussions that began during the Manhattan Project. Should scientists continue pursuing knowledge simply because something is possible? Or should they pause when the consequences become difficult to predict? There are no easy answers. Oppenheimer and his colleagues confronted similar dilemmas more than 80 years ago. Modern researchers continue asking many of the same questions. The technologies have changed. Human nature has not. Looking back, one of the Manhattan Project's greatest ironies becomes clear. It was created to solve a temporary wartime emergency. Instead, it permanently transformed civilization. It accelerated physics, chemistry, engineering, medicine, computing, government research, international diplomacy, military strategy. Few projects in history have influenced so many fields so profoundly. Its legacy reaches far beyond Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It extends into hospitals, universities, power plants, laboratories, satellites, supercomputers, and international negotiations. It is impossible to understand the modern world without understanding the Manhattan Project. And yet, for all its extraordinary achievements, the project left humanity with an uncomfortable inheritance. Knowledge cannot be forgotten. Once discovered, it becomes part of history. The principles of nuclear physics cannot be uninvented. The equations remain true regardless of politics. Future generations inherit not only the benefits of scientific progress, but also its risks. That may be the Manhattan Project's deepest lesson. Science itself is neither moral nor immoral. It reveals what is possible. People decide what comes next. As the years passed, visitors returned to the Trinity site. Many expected something dramatic. Instead, they found a quiet monument surrounded by open desert. Some picked up pieces of green trinitite before collecting them was prohibited. Others simply stood in silence. There is something strangely humbling about the place. No towering skyscrapers. No grand memorial. Just an empty landscape where, for a brief instant, humanity crossed a threshold from which there would be no return. Standing there today, it is difficult not to think about the people who gathered before dawn on July 16, 1945. Some believed they were ending a war. Some believed they were preventing an even greater catastrophe. Some feared what would follow. Most probably understood only part of the future they were creating. None could fully imagine the world that would emerge. A world powered by nuclear reactors, protected and threatened by nuclear deterrence, connected by technologies accelerated through wartime research, still wrestling with the relationship between scientific discovery and political power. The Manhattan Project was never just a story about building a bomb. It was a story about what happens when human curiosity, industrial capacity, political urgency, and existential fear converge at exactly the same moment. It proved that humanity could unlock the energy hidden inside the atom. It also proved that our greatest scientific achievements can become our greatest moral challenges. Perhaps that is why the Manhattan Project continues to fascinate us, not because it belongs to the past, but because it asks questions that remain urgently relevant today. How should knowledge be used? Who decides? What responsibilities come with extraordinary power? And when the next revolutionary technology arrives, as history suggests it inevitably will we remember the lessons first learned in the deserts of New Mexico, or will we once again discover them only after history has already changed? That is why the Manhattan Project cannot be remembered as only America's greatest scientific achievement, nor can it be remembered only as humanity's most dangerous invention. It was and remains both. And perhaps understanding that uncomfortable truth is the first step toward ensuring that the next great breakthrough serves not merely our ambition, but our wisdom as well.